Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1180 of the War News stream. And we have massive news to cover today. First of all, we're hearing that Russia is preparing to launch an ICBM missile at Ukraine at some point in the near future. Also, Putin launched the largest drone attack today on Ukrainian cities. And also, Iranian nuclear talks are collapsing under a new ultimatum being put forward by the Iranians. It's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 48 hours of news from around the world. As many of y'all knew that yesterday we did not run a stream due to a lack of news. So we decided to put yesterday's news into the oven and let it bake for a little bit, and then we pulled it back out today, and this is what we have. It's actually pretty freaking crazy. We were able to confirm that Mohammed Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, the head of one of the largest and most significant Iranian proxy forces within the area of the Near East, was killed by an Israeli airstrike several days ago, confirming the next loss of another significant leader of Hamas. Meanwhile, we have also been able to hear that Israeli armed forces have now begun their ground invasion of the Gaza Strip once more for a permanent occupation or an indefinite occupation at this point. Meanwhile, we have also been able to hear that a car bomb has exploded in Damascus as a part of rebel activities against the Jelani government led by the HTS. We have also been able to hear that the Iranians have refused more U.S. negotiations, as it appears that talks have once again completely stalled, and the Islamic Republic of Iran has said, hell or high water, they will continue to be able to have an ability to enrich uranium to whatever quality that they desire. Meanwhile, outside of that, we have been able to hear that the Russian Federation is preparing to launch an RS-24 intercontinental ballistic missile. You did hear that right. That is an intercontinental ballistic missile, the RS-24 Yars, within the next 24 hours, it is supposed. And it appears that at this point, it is turning targeted at the state of Ukraine. I do want to make this quite clear that while it is an ICBM, from what we are understanding, when it is launched at Ukraine, it will not have any nuclear warheads on board, and it will just be the delivery system making impact with the state of Ukraine, much like the last attack conducted by an Ereshnik intermediate range ballistic missile onto the city of Zaporizhia. Meanwhile, we have also been able to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces have been inflicting significant casualties onto the Russian Federation's armed forces throughout most of the front line, and we have also been able to hear more concerning news that the Russians have unveiled a new longer-range, short-range attack drone near to the area of Chasiv Yar and Konstantinivka. With the capability of a 30-kilometer strike range, it is now targeting the main highway traveling within the towns of Belitske and Drushkivka, as we saw today. Ukrainian forces have been somewhat concerned about this action as it may start to impact Ukrainian logistical abilities near to this front line and possibly impede their defensive activities between Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, and Pokrovsk. However, the Ukrainian armed forces have been holding the Russians at bay throughout the course of the entire day and have been able to liberate the village of Bahatir, as we were able to see in video and picture evidence today. We have quite a significant amount of news, and these are just the main ticket items because there was a little bit of news that happened in North Korea, Libya, and elsewhere that I did not include in our general news summary tonight, but still, it was significant news nonetheless. And I do want to point out that tonight is the Sunday night fundraiser, and we are fundraising for Revive Soldiers of Ukraine, an amazing nonprofit that has done amazing work in the past. We've already raised $520 so far, and any support that the Lee Spring Army can provide is helping out Ukrainian armed forces in recovering from wounds that were near fatal. And so with that, we are going to be moving on into the major breaking news of the night, as we have been able to hear quite significant things, and we're going to be moving on into probably our largest piece of news, singular piece of news for the night, from the area around the city of Yekaterinburg. Yekaterinburg is a fairly interesting city. It actually lies just to the east of the Ural mountain ranges, meaning that this city is technically within the Asian continent. Nevertheless, we have been able to hear that Russian Federation armed forces near to the area of Yekaterinburg are preparing and prepping to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile here within the very near future. According to intelligence that has been provided by the state of Ukraine, they claim that the Russian Federation is planning to launch this RS-24 ICBM missile from a launch site near Yekaterinburg possibly tonight, although we are still waiting at this moment, and we are also believing that this may be within the next 24 hours. It is likely that the ICBM will be launched without an active warhead. It's actually highly likely that it'll be launched without an active warhead, but the ground target was not specified, and we are trying to see what further information can be provided leading up to the launch by the Russians. The RS-24 is actually an ICBM, thoroughbred by definition. And to quickly show you all this missile, this is it right here. It is also known as the Topol MR. And some of y'all may be a little bit interested to know that this is actually one of the systems that you would generally see at the Victory Day parade when they bring out the strategic nuclear deterrent column of the parade in the armored or mobile column. This is one of the vehicles that actually carries this intercontinental ballistic missile, and from what we believe, it is soon to be launched from around the area of Yekaterinburg. The Russian Federation has launched a Rubesh at the state of Ukraine before, which I believe was, and let me go make sure that we get the actual name for that. It was the RS-26 Rubesh, which we also have the article on right here, but this time it's going to be the RS-24 Yars, a far larger missile with a far greater capability of destruction and also firepower range. It is a little bit concerning to hear that the Russian Federation is going to be launching one of these at the state of Ukraine, according to Ukrainian intelligence, and we are still trying to figure out and ascertain as best as we possibly can exactly where this is going to end up being launched at. We have heard at least some rumors in the past that the next target that the Russians will be using for this pretty much nuclear blackmail of a sort will actually be the capital city of Kyiv itself, firing this ICBM or IRBM directly at the city of Kyiv and allowing for the multiple independent re-entry vehicle system to deploy and then allow all of the inert warheads to rain down onto the city itself. We have been able to see that before there was a similar attack that was conducted in Dnipro, not Zaporizhia. I stated that incorrectly in the intro, but in the area of Dnipro, Dnipro, we were able to see that an attack like this was similarly conducted with the RS-26 Rubesh, where we saw that all IRBM warheads, inert of course, did land throughout the southern side of the city of Dnipro and caused very minimal damage, but of course caused a massive scare. The use of any kind of a weapon, such as an intermediate range ballistic missile and an ICBM, or an intercontinental ballistic missile, is largely trying to create a very large and obvious threat of nuclear escalation in the future. These kinds of weapon systems, while capable of mounting conventional warheads onto their delivery systems, are pretty much primarily and solely used for that of nuclear warfare. And so using one of these, even without the warheads being mounted, is something that is wildly concerning and is leading us to believe that the Russian Federation is once again attempting to make the world cower in fear of their aging and old nuclear force that, while aging and old, can still pack a punch in some sense. Nevertheless, many people have been talking at this moment about what will be happening in the future in regards to this attack, which Ukrainian intelligence is stating is practically imminent at this point. And Ukraine claims that Russia will launch an ICBM tonight or tomorrow to scare the West, Europe, and Ukraine as a whole. And will the Ukrainians be targeted? And it seems like a large majority of people are believing that not just will Ukraine be targeted, but Kyiv itself is most likely going to end up being the target of this desperate attempt at a threat. Some others are saying that a Ukrainian city will be targeted, and they're not really sure which one, so it really could be any single one. Throw a dart at the map, and that could be pretty much your best guess. Others are also saying that the Russians will most likely fire it elsewhere, possibly some sort of a test launch, although I wouldn't really know where you would test launch an ICBM per se throughout the Russian Federation. So that's an interesting one. Not saying it's out of the picture. I'm just wondering where in the world an ICBM would land when launched from Yekaterinburg. The only thing I could think of is it going eastwards and towards Alaska for the large part, and landing somewhere out here, the delivery systems harmlessly falling into the woods of Siberia somewhere, but that could cause some pretty decent alarm bells to sound here in the U.S. Nevertheless, there are a lot of different opinions on this in the moment, but it does seem that a lot of people are uniform in their idea, or at least their belief, that not only is Ukraine going to be targeted, but it most likely will be the city of Kyiv that is directly targeted by this ICBM launch coming here soon. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so 61% of the audience said yes, Kyiv will be targeted by this ICBM missile launch that Russia plans on doing either tonight or tomorrow night, while 22% said some Ukrainian city will be targeted, maybe not Kyiv, and 8% said no, Russia will fire it elsewhere. And of course, it's a major deal when Russia fired an IRBM at Ukraine before. That one landed off in pretty much an unpopulated area, thankfully. But firing an ICBM at Ukraine, that would be even crazier, because ICBMs are intercontinental. They're supposed to go across continents. That's the point of an ICBM. They're very long range and they go very fast. The IRBM was not supposed to be used on a target that close to Russia when they fired it at Ukraine last time, but they did it anyway. So to think an ICBM would be fired at Ukraine, that's almost beyond comprehension, in my personal opinion. And like the IRBM situation, I would have to see it to believe it. But Ukraine believes that they're going to do that either tonight or tomorrow night to try to scare the West. And I really doubt it's going to scare the West. It's just going to prove that Russia is more out of control than we thought previously. So my answer to the question of will Ukraine be targeted, in my personal opinion, I think they might be going for Kyiv. And that doesn't mean they're launching a nuke at Kyiv. That just simply means they're launching an empty payload of an ICBM, potentially around the outskirts of Kyiv, which could cause casualties. But once again, it's not going to be carrying a payload, according to Ukrainian intelligence. That means no explosive warhead on board. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that, in my opinion, I would believe that the Ukrainians are most likely going to be targeted here soon, because the Russian Federation is desperate, for one, and also, secondly, I think that they're starting to see that they can actually force the United States into a pretty much paradoxical negotiation attempt that happens endlessly, where the Russians can take advantage of that situation. It seems at this moment, from what we're able to tell, that the U.S. government, or at least the U.S. leadership at the moment, is paralyzed with fear of actually conducting any actions against the Russian Federation that may be considered unfriendly or possibly belligerent. And so for that reason, the Russian Federation may be deciding that their best approach is to lean into the aggressiveness and then just continue to press on forward, because in that action, they are most likely going to cause the United States to freeze in fear so badly that we never move out of the negotiating phase, and we keep on staying in the negotiating phase, even with the Russians making it wildly clear that they are not willing to negotiate whatsoever. That seems to be a high likelihood to be, and for that reason, the Russians are most likely going to lean the farthest they can into the aggressiveness of this action by not only launching the ICBM at Ukraine, but most likely launching it directly at Kyiv. That means that the U.S. embassy, the main embassy, not the consulates inside of Ukraine, will be close to being directly targeted. And this also means that the Ukrainian central government will also be close, if not directly targeted. We'll also know that this will start to possibly put some shockwaves of fear through Europe and the United States, especially considering their inaction so far on actually taking action against the Russians at this point. So it is all leading us to believe that this would be a highly likely action by the Russian Federation. Once again,
also another big red flag as well, as y'all might recall back on May the 9th, about 10 days ago or so, we did report here on this channel that the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv actually issued an alert to its employees and told them that a major significant air attack would be probably occurring in the next several days. That warning is still in place. It's still on the embassy's website. I'm looking at it right now, and they're once again reminding people that if they tell you to run to shelter inside of Kyiv, that means get there fast. So that could be another warning sign that they are planning to target Kyiv with this ICBM missile. But once again, like I said, I'll have to see that to believe it, because that's a very expensive and very, very overqualified missile to shoot that as close as Kyiv, because once again, they're firing it from Yekaterinburg. That is in Russia, and they're firing it right into Kyiv, which is like literally not too far away. That's not what ICBMs are supposed to be used for, but they would be doing it just to make a point to the West. And whether or not the West gets scared from that is another story, but that security alert is still in place just to make that point.
And also, really quickly, I'm trying to see. So, interestingly enough, this actually will be a wild kind of a thing for the Russians to conduct, because I just pulled it up, and an RS-24 Yars does cost approximately $20 million to produce, and that's not including the costs of years of maintenance and upkeep to keep it in an operational status, if we were to assume that this ICBM is fully operational, which it most likely would be, considering that they're going to be launching it. So, with that in mind, they are going to be throwing a multi-tens of millions of dollar investment at the state of Ukraine with an inert warhead, just for the fact of trying to terrorize everyone in the West. It is a pretty expensive kind of an investment that they would be putting in here, but at the same time, I think that this is starting to play into a greater fear of current U.S. leadership and possibly forcing them to remain in negotiations, at least with how the game's being played at the moment. So let me explain really quickly, so that way I can cook here, and maybe y'all agree or disagree, but this is how I'm seeing it so far on my analysis side. So, currently, the United States of America doesn't view the Russians as a legitimate actor in negotiations. I think that that's fairly clear, at least in my opinion. But the problem is that the U.S. is also wildly scared of the Russian Federation. And what I call it is Russian, I guess you could say, Russian pandemonium or Russian rigor mortis is probably the best way to explain it. Because everyone who ever deals with the Russians in the current administration, I'm talking about on the presidential level, always seems to be wildly scared of what the Russians can do. Pretty much believing the propaganda that's been put out for decades that the Soviet Union and later the Russian Federation are military juggernauts and actually are a very dangerous country to play with, not really factoring in the reality of the situation of their armed forces or the reality of the situation of their economic abilities, which are far weakened from the times of the Soviet Union and are the weakest that they've ever been in the 21st century so far as well. The U.S., however, doesn't really view it that way, at least at the very highest level, and they are continuing to try and move forward with negotiations because they are scared that if they support the Ukrainians in an openly unfriendly or belligerent way against the Russian Federation, that the Russian Federation may start to conduct significant reprisals, such as a nuclear action in response to U.S. support to Ukraine. Now, I know that a lot of people are saying that that's exactly not how it works, and I'd agree with you, but I'm trying to explain most likely where the U.S. position is from, because there have been many statements, if we were to take statements at face value, and of course, there's a lot of debate as to whether people should take statements from at face value at this point from the current administration, but here on this channel we do, because that's how we've done for every administration. If we were to take all the statements at face value, it appears that quite clearly they don't believe that the Russians are operating in good faith any longer. But at the same time, they're not stopping the attempts to negotiate with them like we said we would. So either that is showing that they're lying, which, you know, we really can't go into that because that's a more subjective thing than anything, and we try and keep things impartial here on the channel, or the second option, which is the one that we're going with because it would be impartial, is that they want to act against the Russians, but they are actually scared of what the Russians may do in response. So that would be largely my assessment of the situation. And so if the Russians fire an ICBM at Kyiv, it's playing directly into the fears that are already planted at the highest levels of the U.S. executive offices, and it will ensure that they say, hell no, we can't really ever go back into supporting Ukraine full on. We just have to keep going in a loop, negotiating with the Russians, knowing it's going nowhere, so that way we don't have to actually go in and support the Ukrainians and possibly see some sort of a major reprisal. I think that that's largely what they're thinking. I think that's actually a little bit silly, but that seems to me to be the case of what's going on right now in the current U.S. administration, at least from what I can tell. And once again, you never really know if that's exactly what's going through their head or if it's something else, but that's the best guess I can take from afar, about 1,000 miles away from Washington, D.C., trying to see what's actually going on up there. Nevertheless,
it's weird. It seems like a shift across the board. Like if you notice in the Russia-Ukraine situation, if Putin follows through and actually launches an ICBM at Ukraine with an unloaded warhead or a non-explosive warhead, that is going to up the stakes, and that's going to put more pressure on the U.S. administration to either take a stance or back down. It's going to force them into a corner. Also notice that Iran is doing the same thing at the exact same time. They just made a statement today saying that they're going to keep enriching uranium no matter if it's a deal or no deal. They're going to keep doing it. So both Russia and Iran are taking a very aggressive approach all of a sudden. They've sort of stopped playing around with these talks for the brief minute, and they're trying to test and see what is the U.S. administration going to do if they're backed into a corner. They're treated very aggressively by these two governments, and I'm sure that both of them are watching to see, are they going to back down or are they going to go further? And the way they respond is going to dictate what those countries do from that point forward. So it's actually very, very crucial how the U.S. is going to respond to these two situations currently going on. And I'm kind of with the enforcer. I'm not really sure how the U.S. is going to respond, because so far the trend is to back down. But if pushed into a corner, are they going to lash out at Russia and or Iran? That's the question.
What I would say, if I was the president, let me spitball here with all of y'all and say what I would most likely try and do as my course of action as the president, is that a sign of weakness here is going to get us stabbed 60 times, like Caesar was stabbed in Rome a couple of thousand years ago. So we cannot show any kind of signs of weakness or trust with the Russians or the Chinese. They are our enemies, or really Iran in this situation, because Iran and Ukraine, out of the three situations that we have going on right now, are really the two most pressing. But as far as Ukraine and Russia goes, I think it is the most pressing sort of a one to give an example for, because Russia is nuclear armed at this point, and I think that we need to show that no matter what, the U.S. is going to swat someone down even if they are nuclear armed. So what I would do is that if the Russians actually do launch this nuclear weapon, instead of backing down and going into a paradoxical form of negotiation, which never ends and never achieves anything, I think it would be much better that if they did something like that, we state that the Russians are clearly operating in bad faith from this point forward, and they do not want a resolution of the war, because while we are attempting negotiations, they are firing off ICBMs that are unarmed at Kyiv, making quite a clear picture that they're wanting to pretty much win and not achieve any kind of an amicable peace. And for that reason, the U.S. will have to have new sanctions drafted up in the Senate and the House to be moved against the Russian Federation, and we will also need to see that the Senate and the House simultaneously passes further congressional drawdown orders for the U.S. Armed Forces to provide material support to the state of Ukraine for them to be able to continue on the war. And then I believe what the next best action to take here in America would be what would be called pre-mobilization efforts. So we would then see that the Congress once again then passes a completely separate bill, which would be largely a part of the annual spending bill, but we would need to see that the House and the Senate pass a new spending bill that increases the U.S. military budget, but largely focuses that budget primarily on arms and ammunition procurements, so that way we can make sure that it's showing that the U.S. is actually not only arming up itself, but is arming up its allies as well, as a lot of countries in Europe largely do operate off of NATO standardized calibers, such as 155 millimeter ammunition shells for heavier artillery pieces, which are pretty much ubiquitous across NATO at this point. And if the United States starts to produce a large amount of those shells, along with a lot of other conventional weaponry, it will start to give a message to the Russian Federation that they might want to back down, because it's not going to go into a nuclear war first, folks. Some people might think that, but that's largely from a position of ignorance. A nuclear war will stem from the outbreak of a conventional war and how badly that goes. And so if the Russians are really bad off, they're going to have to go nuclear. But because of the US's doctrine of mutually assured destruction, while they may be able to go nuclear, and while they may end up causing crippling damage to the West or the United States, the Russians will be dead by the end of that exchange. Most of them really will be, unlike here in the West. Here in the West, we assume that about a third of the current population would survive a nuclear conflict within the first 2 years of the actual nukes falling. In the Russian Federation, however, it's a far lower number. It's expected that only 20 to 15% of their population would survive the outbreak of a nuclear conflict, because unlike the United States, with a high population spread, or more so low population density in specific areas, the Russian Federation actually has a high population density in multiple urbanized areas, meaning that smaller amounts of nuclear weapons can actually pose a greater deal of devastation percentage-wise to the Russian population than it would the United States. And that also means that Putin has a much higher chance of getting killed than really anyone else here in the US would. So with that in mind, I think that would start to get the Russians to back off, because they would be going, is this really worth our annihilation over? Because we're not even going to be around to see the victory. And of course, the U.S. would not be either, but at that point, the Russians have to blink. We're pretty much forcing them to blink, because they can either go into a conventional war that they are guaranteed to lose, or they can back off and they can actually find some sort of a peaceful resolution to the conflict, where we will see that both sides achieve something of which they both want, but also lose things that they both want as well. So then it would end up being an equally unhappy resolution, but a resolution that would achieve both sides' aims for the large part and completely avoid this. But if we continue down the position we're going on right now, we're not securing any of our aims. We're pretty much giving away the state of Ukraine and Eastern European interests, because the Russians are starting to show a strong hand and we're not. So we have to be able to show a strong hand in response. Otherwise, this is going to start sending shockwaves around the world. And people like Iran will start to say there's no point in negotiating with the U.S. because if anyone comes to our aid, like, say, the Russians with their nuclear arms again, the U.S. will back off and we'll be able to continue nuclearization. Or China, for example, will say, we can break the U.S. island containment chain that currently exists right now by invading Taiwan, because America isn't going to be there to support Taiwan, because we too are also nuclear armed, and on top of that, the U.S. has a strong aversion to conflict, even when it's in its own interest to protect its own investments for the large part around the globe. And so when we look at that all as a full picture here, this actually has some very serious implications to how we are going to be responding in Ukraine. And so far, we've already been laying out the kind of image that is showing that the United States is actually weak on a foreign policy front, and that other countries have a rife moment to take advantage of that weakness and to start to achieve their own domestic and even foreign ambitions without really a large deal of U.S. involvement. The U.S. believes that the pen is always mightier than the sword, although the truth is that the pen and the sword are mighty in different instances, and you have to take them as they come. But I hope that addresses that well, at least in my opinion, well, what we're seeing right now about the possible nuclear launch, or not really nuclear launch, but an ICBM launch that is going to be happening here soon on Ukraine. And I do want to reiterate, folks, that this ICBM is not going to have nuclear weapons on board. From what we know, it's going to be an inert round, much like the RS-24 Rubesh was when the Dnipro attack was also launched. But nevertheless, I hope that does address that well. But in the meantime, while we were talking about the significant possible ICBM launch in Russia, we have also been able to hear of significant news inside of Israel, as we were able to confirm that Mohammed Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, was actually killed. He has been successfully eliminated by an Israeli Air Force airstrike that occurred several days ago. Hamas originally claimed that Mohammed Sinwar had not been killed, but it does appear that as additional intelligence has come out in the next following days, and especially today when we were able to get the clear confirmation, it does appear that Mohammed Sinwar was successfully killed by the Israeli Defense Forces, and specifically the Israeli Air Force, in an airstrike that occurred in the Jabalia area of North Gaza, which appears to have successfully not only hit his compound, but also killed a decent amount of his staff and aides who were also in the facility with him as well. It does appear...
Also, by the way, just for some clarification, this is not the original Sinwar. This is the son of Sinwar, correct? That was taken out this time.
Yeah, I think this is Sinwar Jr. technically.
Okay, yeah, because people were getting confused about that. They're like, wait a minute, didn't Israel already take out like Sinwar, the first leader of Hamas? And they did. According to what I know, the first one, which was basically the father, Sinwar, he was killed by Israel a while back. This is either the son or a relative of Sinwar that took charge of Hamas after he was killed. So that's who this is.
And also, by the way, to clarify, because this all gets confusing, Nasrallah was the leader of Hezbollah, who was killed in Beirut in Lebanon. And then Sinwar, the last Sinwar, was actually killed, I believe, in Han Yunis or Rafah. And the current Sinwar, the one that we're talking about tonight, ended up being killed in Jabalia, north of the city of Gaza itself in the Gaza Strip. So that's kind of the run-of-the-mill of all of the bad guys who've ended up getting wiped out so far by the Israelis over about the past year and a half. It's honestly getting on towards 2 years at this point. But that's pretty much the run of the land of all of the guys who've ended up getting killed down there. But nevertheless, Nasrallah
also one more thing as well. I said he was either the son of the Sinwar or the relative. He's actually the brother, just to make that correction. I see people saying that in the chat, and I did a quick research. The guy currently eliminated is the brother of the original Sinwar.
Oh, I see you know your Sinwars well. Good one. And you, sir, are you ready to receive my dead Sinwar? How dare you, sir? Get your hands off my Sinwar. But beyond that, man, that saying "get your hands off my Sinwar," that almost sounded like 877 Cash Now. You know that commercial I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
I have a long-term terrorist threat, and I need help now. And it's like, honestly, man. Anyways, moving on from that, and that stupid joke right there, because I don't know if that's getting any laughs or not. But beyond that, we were also able to hear, before I get on deep into the Middle East news at the moment, which actually has been significant today, that Zelensky did hold an impromptu meeting. I've largely, by the way, folks, I want to add this in really quickly because this is something that I want to make sure to include here, is that considering the situation and the current U.S. Administration's fear, I've largely started to move them almost entirely out of our news coverage because some people, whether we mean it or not, like to take it that whenever we say anything that is critiquing or criticizing any kind of actions taken by the U.S. government as an inherently political statement, I've decided to just largely remove any statements or mentions of the U.S. administration altogether because most of the time there will be good statements that are made and then we say that they're good and then people will criticize us because we're saying that something's good, and then when they actually end up doing something that's bad and then we say that it's bad, then we get criticized for it being political as well. So that's why I didn't include that bulletin tonight. I actually didn't expect that there would be a poll on it, but beyond that we will address it while I didn't include it, but that was just kind of a point for everyone going forward, is that I didn't really include a bulletin in that tonight because, you know, that could happen. You could talk about it and then something stupid happens and then we critique it and then people want to say that we're inherently political. Nevertheless, Zelensky did hold an impromptu 30-minute meeting with the U.S. Vice President today, and some people are wondering, what was it about? Some people are saying that it was Zelensky discussing the ongoing Russian escalations with the Vice President. Others are saying that Zelensky is trying to get more aid. Some are saying that it seems like nothing major, and others are unsure and undecided. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So 59% said Zelensky was trying to discuss Russian escalation with the vice president during this impromptu meeting, while 25% said Zelensky's trying to get more aid by speaking about it, and 7% said it seems like nothing major. And considering the fact this was somewhat of an impromptu meeting, this was not really scheduled to take place, but it did happen and occur for about 30 to 40 minutes. Also, by the way, Rubio was there as well, the Secretary of State, also the several other titles that he holds as well, but mainly Secretary of State. So I have a feeling they were discussing the upcoming escalation by Russia, probably the launch of an ICBM missile, because once again, that was uncovered by U.S. intel, and that was told to the Ukrainians, and then the Ukrainian intel then said, okay, we've confirmed that, and we do know that Russia is planning to launch an ICBM. So I have a feeling it was discussing that and probably discussing what the response is going to look like when that does occur and what kind of support the U.S. is going to provide to respond to that aggression by Russia. That is my assumption, because once again, it was a very short meeting. It was like 30 or 40 minutes, and that's not too long to discuss anything. And once again, it is with the vice president, who appears to be a little bit, I guess you could say, neutral or somewhat not very friendly to Zelensky. So 30 minutes, that's a pretty short time. But I'm going to be with a 59%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that it most likely was Zelensky discussing Russian escalation. We do have to remember that the Ukrainians are largely talking to the United States right now primarily about the actual attempts at peace in the war, which seem to be going nowhere because, you know, while I'm largely cutting out the news on that, I do have to kind of give my honest thoughts. The Ukrainians actually followed through with what the U.S. wanted them to do and went down to Istanbul to talk to Putin. Putin didn't even show up. He didn't even send any real ministers. He sent assistants and secretaries and choir boys down to Istanbul to go talk to Zelensky and then make the most insane list of demands we've ever seen. It didn't show that the Russians were even getting close to attempting peace. It actually showed the opposite, that the Russians were doubling down and in fact demanding even more so far in the conflict, which makes it quite obvious that the Russians do not want peace. So the president of Ukraine was most likely speaking to the vice president of the United States about the actual situation that's going on with the Russian Federation and saying that they really don't mean peace, and we would like it if we could start to shift back into reality where we have to actually fight the Russian Federation because there's no other option rather than giving up and surrendering. So that would be my opinion on that. So I'd have to be with 59%. I largely would believe that that would be the case. But this is something that I don't really think is going to be going anywhere, because the president of Ukraine could quite literally show that Putin stated that he wants to kill every single Ukrainian and every single European and every single American, and that he's not going to stop until he's able to achieve that. And then the current U.S. administration will most likely go, well, that sounds like talks to me, and let's get down to more of them. And it would just be something along those lines. So it really is honestly just bumping gums. And I'm sure that the president of Ukraine was asked if he said thank you recently as well during that talk. But beyond that, we are going to be moving on from that little bit of news and on into some more news down inside the Middle East, as we were able to hear that the Israelis' ground invasion is beginning again anew, as the Israeli Defense Forces have announced the beginning of extensive ground operations across Gaza by both the regular army and reservist elements as a part of Operation Gideon's Chariots, with its primary objectives being the total occupation of the Gaza Strip and the destruction of Hamas, or hummus, which is actually a decent chickpea spread. These ground operations follow a large-scale air and naval strike campaign over the last few days, intended to further degrade the military capability of Hamas and other terror groups, targeting over 670 Hamas sites and positions in order to disrupt the enemy's preparations and assist the ground operation. So it does appear that Israeli ground operations are now beginning in earnest today inside the Gaza Strip, and will be a part of Operation Gideon's Chariots on into the future, which is pretty much leading up to the indefinite occupation by the Israelis of the Gaza Strip, and attempting to pretty much destroy the Hamas forces through a campaign of attrition. The Israelis believe that eventually the Hamas forces will run out of supplies and will have to start to return back to the surface. And once they start to return to the surface, they can start wiping them out. So that's kind of the concept. Or they can stay in there indefinitely, find the tunnels, and then destroy them while Hamas is still inside. Either way, they're generally planning on being there long enough that they will be able to degrade Hamas's abilities to such an extent that they will cease to exist for quite some time until they're able to rebuild their strength, possibly a decade or 2 decades down the road. But moving on from that, we have also been able to hear that humanitarian aid will be resuming in the meantime, as Israel's security cabinet has decided to immediately resume humanitarian aid transfers to Gaza via several international organizations until the new aid mechanism begins on May 24th, stating this information from 2 Israeli senior officials. It does appear that the Israelis are getting some pressure from the U.S. government currently and are caving to it a little bit, as the United States has stated there's been significant concern about the humanitarian situation inside of the Gaza Strip, and it now appears that the Israelis are going to have to go in and provide humanitarian aid in the middle of also trying to wipe out Hamas, which is a little bit of a controversial thing, because while a lot of people say that providing support to the Palestinian people inside of Gaza would be a beneficial thing, the reality is a lot more nuanced than that, as Hamas largely starts to seize the food aid once it arrives in the Gaza Strip, considering that the food aid delivery services are unarmed, and they begin to use the food aid as pretty much a form of control over the population, largely demanding some sort of loyalty or some sort of element of control over the people receiving the food aid before they're able to get it. Meaning that while there is food aid being provided, and it does help to alleviate the difficulties and sufferings of the Gaza Strip, at the same time, it further entrenches the Hamas's position as an actual political force or an actual militant force inside of the area of the Strip. So it's a very kind of a double-edged sword sort of an ordeal. Nevertheless, a lot of people have been saying that there is a lot also going on in the region beyond that, as we were able to hear that Iron Dome interceptions were occurring over Tel Aviv as more Houthi missiles were being fired overnight, once again by another Iranian proxy on the other end of the Arabian Peninsula.
sounds like a Call of Duty sound effect in the background.
Matthew's been playing a lot of Call of Duty lately, folks. It's actually pretty interesting, but you know, the storylines, folks, they're not for me. I like to be a grunt. But anyways, we can see another clip right here.
What is that in the sky? An illumination shell or something?
I think that might actually be the moon. I can't really tell, though. I don't think it's...
That is a bright moon right there, man. That is like almost like a star or something.
Yeah, it really is. Or the camera is really picking it up badly. One or the other. Then we can see what appears to be a possible interception. Or an Iron Dome firing off. We see another missile. And it appears that now interceptions are occurring over the eastern area of Tel Aviv. And then in our last clip here, we also got to see another interceptor from the Iron Dome. But that is all the clips that we have from Tel Aviv. Nevertheless, while Iranian proxy forces are continuing to fire at Israel and also continuing to destabilize the region, as they have been for years, we have been able to hear that the Islamic Republic of Iran has now shrugged off U.S. negotiators again, as the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that Washington's demands are far removed from the reality of the nuclear negotiations, and we will continue uranium enrichment, meaning that the Iranians will not be accepting any kind of restrictions on their enrichment abilities, and they are wanting to retain the ability to continue to enrich uranium fuels into weapons-grade uranium. This is something that is showing us that the Iranians on every level, from Khamenei even down to foreign ministers such as this one, are continuing to say the official Iranian governmental stance is that they are not taking any attempt at negotiating on Iranian nuclear weaponry or Iranian nuclearization to be an honest negotiation, and they will continue on their own path no matter what's being talked about in negotiations or what they're even getting towards at all on the negotiating table. Many people have also heard that the special envoy to the Middle East and also the special envoy to the Eastern European region, largely Ukraine, Steve Witkoff, has started to clear out his schedule recently, as many have heard that he has postponed, at least indefinitely at this point, his visit to Vladimir Putin that was supposed to be happening here in the future. And we've also heard that once again the talks with the Islamic Republic of Iran have also been suspended as well, as it does appear that there is really no way to make it forward with the Iranians on nuclearization talks. It seems as though many people are believing at this point that the talks are basically over, and a lot of people have been voicing that in our recent poll that we've asked all of y'all about. And a lot of people are saying, considering that the Iranians are pretty much shrugging off U.S. negotiators again today, that the talks are basically over and there's really no point in even attempting to go forward from here. Others are saying it's just tough talk from the Iranians and eventually they'll give. Some are also saying that it seems like it's almost over, and others are unsure and undecided. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
So it looks like about 76% of the audience said yes, the talks are basically over now that the Iranians have issued an ultimatum and said they'll continue enriching uranium no matter what the case is, with or without a deal. And about 10% said no, it's just tough talk from Iran and the talks will continue. And 9% said it seems like it's almost over, but not quite yet. And it is, of course, very hard to predict where this is going to go, because this will typically be the end of talks, because the entire purpose of having these talks is for Iran to completely denuclearize, or at least denuclearize in a large part. And with them saying that they're going to continue enriching uranium, which is the one thing we want them to stop doing so they can't develop a nuclear weapon, that basically renders the talks moot. So I'm not really sure what's left to discuss at this point. And once again, Iran is run by a group of terrorists, basically. So we're negotiating with terrorists again. It's never really a good thing to do. So we're finding out how that really works, and it doesn't work out really well. So I'm going to say I'm with a 9%. It seems like it's almost over, but I think they'll try a last-ditch attempt to try to save the talks yet again. In my opinion, it will be futile, but I think they're going to try to save it one last time. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that the talks are basically over, and there's really no way to move on from here. It's very obvious at this point that U.S. negotiating attempts with the Russian Federation and Iran are making it absolutely nowhere. And I'm not even really sure where the U.S. stands on negotiations with China over the ongoing trade war at the moment, because we have no clue if they're even making any progress there. So because once again, all of their talks are secret, super secret. So we have no clue what the U.S. and China are achieving behind closed doors in Geneva. Beyond that, however, I would say that the talks with Iran are completely over. There's really no way to move forward, and the Iranians don't want to move forward. And I just saw someone say, and this one's always a fun one to me. Art of the deal is not instant. Oh man, I don't think you really know what you're talking about, man. Like, I don't mean to say it like that, but let me lay it out to you. So there is a maximum, a minimum amount of time, or really a maximum amount of time that we have to be able to achieve some sort of a deal with the Iranians before they have a nuclear weapon. So time is running out. Every day that passes is a day that we're not getting back, and it's a day getting closer to them having a nuclear weapon. The Iranians have made it clear on every governmental level that they are inherently working on the ability to process and possess weapons-grade uranium to produce a nuclear weapon. So that means that every single day that passes, we are getting closer to them actually having a usable nuclear weapon that they are going to test, and then from that point forward, there are no negotiations, because at that point, they're nuclear armed. There's no way back at that point. What's done is done then. So every single day that we're wasting right now in these failed negotiating talks is not really an art of the deal. It's really more so buying the Iranians time for them to get closer to developing that nuclear weapon and actually possessing one indefinitely from that point on, just like North Korea is. So what we're doing right now is pretty much saying these talks are futile and inevitable. We're making no progress at all, and we haven't made any progress for months because we're literally still at square one with Iran. We haven't even laid out a minimum of things that the Iranians would accept, or things that the U.S. would give up on either side, because both sides are at an absolute deadlock. We are demanding at this point complete denuclearization of Iran, including their peaceful nuclear programs, and the Iranians are saying that they aren't even willing to give up their nuclear weapons program, much less their civilian nuclear weapons, and they are going to keep on working on enriching weapons-grade uranium fuels to be used in a nuclear bomb. So it's quite clear at this point that there is no art to this deal. It is more so just running in a circle and then pretending like we're experts or something. It honestly is the same kind of delusional thing that a lot of people in my generation do, where they're like the crypto bros and they put like $1,000 in Bitcoin and then they lose like $500 on the first day, and then they tell you it's just a part of the grind and they'll get it all back by grinding harder tomorrow. That's just not the reality of it. You just lost $500, and the chances of getting that back immediately tomorrow, it's going to be a little bit tough. And this is kind of the same situation that we're looking at in Iran right here. There is no way to actually work this to where there is going to be an art of a deal. If neither side is willing to make a deal, you just have to move on and know that that's the situation. You can't force the Iranians to make a deal. How are they going to do that? The only way you can do that is by threatening the use of force of arms, pretty much bombing them or invading them. Those are really the only two ways that we can force them to get to the negotiating table. And considering that the U.S. is already showing in Ukraine that they are not willing to really follow through with any kind of aggressive action to make their words mean anything, the Iranians are also pretty much thumbing their nose at us and telling us to get lost at this point, because they're fairly certain that the U.S. would also do nothing to them because they would be scared of getting involved in a larger conflict. So that's what I'd have to say in my opinion. I think that the talks are over, and I think the United States has to make an example out of someone. When the crowd starts getting a little wild, we have to go out there and we have to, in a foreign policy terms, we have to put someone down to get a message across to everyone else that this is the way the United States plays the game. If the Iranians want to sit here and tell us to get lost and they're going to keep doing what they're doing, that's completely fine. We'll just go and wipe out their government. That will be our next option. We'll just start airstriking every single government building in Iran. We'll literally decimate their government to where there isn't anyone to call the shots. Or we could go through and bomb their nuclear research facilities. Or we could go through and completely decapitate their armed forces and nuclear research and development facilities from the air, and then send in a ground force to wipe out whatever's left. There are many things that the United States could do in this situation to largely send a message to everyone else that the United States isn't going to be playing games. We can either play out what what's really going on, or there's going to be serious consequences. And I think at this point it's quite clear that the United States has to start laying out the reality of the situation to these countries, that it isn't a smartest idea to go into any kind of a negotiating attempt in bad faith, because the United States will come and they will have your head if you do not negotiate with them properly. And I think that Iran might be the best example of that at the moment, considering that they're non-nuclear armed, and this will probably be the easiest one to knock out of the three. So with that, I hope that addresses that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because it doesn't really seem like a smart idea to continue to let everyone pretty much just crap on U.S. negotiating and diplomatic efforts and keep letting that slide. It's showing that we're getting wildly weak at this point, not really in our actual power, but in our will to use that kind of power. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And I do realize that there are a lot of people here tonight, a wildly large amount of people. At the peak tonight, we had 10.3 thousand people here, which is quite a significant number. And we've also had 43,000 people here in total in the first hour. And if you have enjoyed this stream, make sure to subscribe, folks. Make sure to subscribe. We are hovering around the 354,000 to 355,000 mark these days. So if you want to subscribe, we'd be happy to have you join. But beyond that, I do also have to say that our fundraiser is doing pretty damn good. We're up to $1,800 raised nearly of the $2,500 goal. Dang!
Fantastic. Look at that. I love to see it.
And of course, the Leaf Spring Army has never missed a fundraiser goal, and hopefully it will be able to hit that $2,500 goal before the stream is out. But beyond that, I do want to make sure that we take a brief moment here while we're speaking about the Middle East to gather some questions from the chat, because I do know that there are many people with many good questions, and I would like to get to a couple of them at least before we move on into the rest of the news of what's going on in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, as well as North Africa, Europe, and then the actual Ukrainian front lines. So what do we got, Matthew? What do we have?
All right, so since we're on the topic of Iran, I'm going to grab a few questions dealing with that topic. Then later we'll grab some more questions about Ukraine and Russia. So our first question of our 3 questions we're going to grab right now, this one goes to Fire Falcon, who said, how far could Iran reach with a potential nuclear weapon if they do finish development?
That is a great question. Right now, at the moment, the delivery of a nuclear weapon will largely be limited by the distance of their missiles. And they don't have incredibly long-range missiles, but they have some that get on up there. Iranian missile fleet. Let me go show you the variety of missiles that they have and their ranges. So let's see, Iranian missile ranges. Oh, let me go see if I can get that instead. So here we are. So this is currently the run-of-the-mill of the missiles that they currently have in their possession. This isn't to say that all of them are nuclear capable or could become nuclear capable. Some of them may simply just not have the right kind of size or payload ability to carry a nuclear warhead, but that would be highly unlikely. So we can generally assume that most of these missiles would actually have an ability to carry a nuclear warhead. So if we were to go off of that, or this map, which is a little bit better, the Sumar, which has a range of 2,500 kilometers, can actually put the entirety of the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, western China, the entirety of southern Russia, and about most of Eastern Europe within its range, which would be a considerable threat for the Islamic Republic of Iran to possess that kind of a weapon, considering that any U.S. actions within the periphery of that nuclear weapon could be threatened directly by Iran as against their interests, and they could attempt to escalate into some kind of a nuclear conflict. This is the important thing about stopping people from having a nuclear weapon, is that it pretty much freezes everything in the Middle East and Central Asia, as well as Eastern Europe, from happening, because they could threaten the use of nuclear arms. It's fairly similar to what has happened so far in East Asia because of North Korea possessing nuclear weapons, is that they pretty much freezed anything that could actually happen significantly on the Korean Peninsula, as well as within the Sea of Japan. We have to always tiptoe around the area because we are quite scared of any kind of collateral that may be faced from U.S. action in the area, because North Korea could nuke South Korea, Japan, or the continental United States itself. And that's what makes that a wildly concerning thing to consider, is that once these countries do possess a nuclear weapon, they not only have the abilities they currently have now, which are these right here. Usually a country like North Korea, for example, will take a massive effort, a momentous effort, to actually produce and field true intercontinental ballistic missiles, meaning that not only is this area under threat, but the United States would come under threat. And let me go show you all that. North Korean ICBM ranges. And let me go get the map for that, because this is something that's quite interesting here. So this is the Hwasong 15, and this is actually a little bit outdated as well because they've come out with later Hwasong variants that have more range, but the Hwasong 15 can actually target the entirety of the continental United States as well as pretty much all of its overseas territories as well, which is an incredibly concerning thing. And when North Korea originally got a nuclear weapon, no one was really that concerned. It was a scary thing for South Korea and Japan, but no one was really concerned beyond that because everyone said, well, you know, they don't really have any ICBMs, and creating ICBMs is a absolutely momentous effort, and so they most likely will never be able to target or hit the continental United States. And then they developed the ability to where they could. So that means that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it's not just the Middle East and Central Asia and Eastern Europe that's under threat and making it a Middle Eastern or Central Asian or Eastern European problem. It becomes an American problem because of the range of an ICBM, and they will develop one. So with that in mind, that's really the current practical range of an Iranian nuclear weapon, and we could assume that a lot of these variants of missiles that the Iranians currently possess could easily be nuclear armed. But that won't stop them from developing even longer and larger missiles that will be able to get more significant range on targets inside the North American continent, which would be, of course, a doomsday scenario at that point, because anything that happens in the Middle East that the U.S. is involved in, the Iranians can immediately escalate to, we're going to nuke the United States. And that means that we either have to accept that that's an inherent risk or we have to back off. And a lot of people these days don't really have the stomach for risk, so everyone will want to back off in the United States, meaning that the Iranians will be able to do whatever they want and pretty much run the Middle East at that point, based off of what we're seeing right now. So I hope that does address that well, at least for what we're knowing at the moment. And I hope that also lays out the potential for further threats or further fear that the Iranians could exude by possessing and using any kind of nuclear missiles. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And, oh, Matthew, you know something I just realized? We haven't called off the top donors, have we?
We sure haven't. And also, we're up to $1,870 raised, by the way, which is fantastic. We're getting super close to goal.
Man, I'm telling you, that's absolutely crazy right there. I thought you were going to immediately get into the top donors, and then you stopped. I was like, oh, dang. But hey, man, absolutely crazy. Look at that. We have gotten up to $1,920 at this point. We are getting about $500, $580 away from the fundraiser goal. Absolutely incredible right there. And I gotta say, I hope that we are able to reach that fundraiser goal tonight. It's been a little bit of a slower fundraiser, but that's all right. We have been supporting American and Western interests for 1,180 days, and so we largely do assume that eventually the steam will run out. But the Lee Spring Army has pretty much outlasted everyone in the category for supporting American and Western interests, so it's pretty wild to think that we're even chugging on tonight still, which is a pretty crazy thing. But beyond that, Matthew, who are the top donors? Lay them out. Lay out the law, Matthew.
All right, so up first, we have a $200 donation, the largest one of the night, from Uncle Vampy. And a huge shout to Uncle Vampy for the massive support of the fundraiser. Also, big shout out to James Hughes, who put in a $150, along with Old Warrior, who put in a $100. And then we had a $100 from Just Chillin', as well as BC Skyman, Hal Rose, and also a $50 from John Combes, as well as Danny B, Rad Doctor, Mark Young, Samuel Sizamonski, as well as a $50 from Charles Hazlitt, Axel K, Juana McIntosh, and Ray Allard. And once again, huge shout out to all of our top donors, which we just called off, and everybody else as well for helping us to reach, so far, almost $2,000 raised, and we're about $500 away from smashing that goal. So fantastic progress once again. And Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say, absolutely incredible progress. We have reached $1,960 on the fundraiser, and we are only $500 away from that fundraiser goal. And hopefully we'll be able to hit it wildly soon, because the Lee Spring Army has never missed a fundraiser goal in the entirety of its history. And I would like to see that the Lee Spring Army continues to hold up that record and streak even until this very day. And so with that, I have to congratulate you all once again, the donors, big and small, because I will continue to ensure that the Lee Spring Army is able to hold its ground in supporting American and Western interests, and is able to continue to say, long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never die. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the second question of this question segment.
All right, so this one goes to Alan Deshane, who said, what are the chances that the ICBM that Russia attempts to launch is a dud? And if it is, will we know that it was a dud?
Technically, it is guaranteed to be a dud for the large part because it's not going to be carrying any nuclear weapons. And considering that the delivery system is not even going to have any explosives on board whatsoever, technically that's a dud by every definition. If you're asking about whether the missile is going to be able to fire off or not, the missile will fire. This is a pretty high-profile sort of a thing that they're about to conduct here, so they are going to go through every single effort that they can to make sure that the missile does fire. Not only that, most importantly, the RS-24 is not a recent system. It's a little bit older from what I understand, so let me make sure to get this here for y'all. It was produced in 2009, which is a old enough system that it has been proven. Notice that they're not using any of the newer systems like the Sarmat, which have had a wildly high failure rate even after it's been put into service. The Yars have a pretty decent success rate, at least on what we've seen so far since 2009. So with that in mind, these systems will most likely be able to fire successfully. They're going to make sure that this nuclear missile does work before it fires, because if they fail, then it's going to be a pretty big joke. It's already a big joke when they fail in the middle of a Sarmat test, considering that the Sarmat's supposed to be the bane and fear of the entire world right now, and those fail pretty frequently. But if they're actually attempting to launch this nuclear weapon at the state of Ukraine, and this thing, say, blew up on the pad or blew up inside of its launcher, that would be something that the Russians would never really be able to recover from. And that may actually have the reverse intended effect that they're planning on having in the psyche of American leadership. It may actually show that the Russians are far weaker than anticipated, that they can't even get a supposedly operational nuclear weapon or really an ICBM to fly. So that would be my opinion. I think that this system is definitely going to work without a doubt. They will
Also, one other thing as well, to answer a different part of the question, and also a question many other people have been asking. They say, will we know when it launches, and will we know if it's a dud or not? We will know within seconds when it launches. Like, we have those type of capabilities to detect the launches of ICBMs and also IRBMs like that. We'll know within seconds, but also we'll probably likely know before they even launch it, because Russia does use deconfliction lines still. They'll pick up the phone and they'll call the United States and let them know, even though they're enemies, that they're going to launch this weapon, and don't worry, we're not launching it at the United States. We're launching it at a different location, just to let you know. That's to prevent a nuclear war from breaking out. And of course, that would be something in Russia's interest to do that. They've always done that in the past. So I really doubt they're going to go blind in this situation where they don't tell a soul. They probably will warn the United States ahead of time, which seems a bit weird, but they're trying to basically have some self-preservation. They don't want to get nuked with the United States getting a little bit worried that it's actually going to come for us. So also, if it does blow up, we'll detect that immediately as well. We'll see a signature that there is a massive explosion, and the heat is what gives away what happens. Basically, we have heat sensors with satellites to detect that kind of thing. So yeah, we wouldn't know, and also we wouldn't know well ahead of time, most likely as well.
Also, another thing that I saw some people bringing up, let's see, some people have been saying, let's see here, let's see, where in the world did it go? Every time I look for these, they always disappear. I wish I had a spreadsheet where I could put these down and get them later. But let's see here. Dang, man. Someone said, okay, here it was. TG Butter said 75% failure rate, and that's speaking about the Sarmat. And that is true. The Sarmat does have a 75% failure rate, which is abysmal. It's terrible. Usually you're supposed to see that a failure rate on most weapon systems is somewhere around, at least historically, 10% was fine. 5% is usually what's shot for these days or less, but having a 75% failure rate means that weapon is completely inoperable. So that's something interesting to point out about the Sarmat, but once again, the Russians don't want to go out with those kinds of statistics. They want to go out with an impressive show. A lot of people don't really notice or pay attention to statistics much, which is a little bit crazy. Even at high leadership levels, they don't. What they look for more so, at least in this current administration, is the show of things. You know, can you put it on TV? Can you put makeup on it? Is a reality TV worthy? And if an RS-24 Yars is fired at Ukraine, and it does work, and it does end up launching its warheads into Kyiv inert, that is going to be a pretty concerning thing to them, because they're going to go, wow, they just did that. They could do that to us. That's wildly scary. We don't really like that. And that will be generally the reaction from the U.S. administration. I know that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because the truth of it is that most Russian nuclear weapons would not work, and also that really shouldn't determine how we react to situations that are inherently in our interests, but that's most likely what the Russians are shooting for at this point, pun intended. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the final question of this segment, and then we're going to be getting on right back into the news.
Also, by the way, huge shout out to BC Skyman for the $100 support to the fundraiser and also all the other support we've seen since then as well. We're now up to $2,211 raised, which we're about $300 or so away from hitting the goal. So getting super close to it, by the way, and can't wait to see it. But jumping into our last question of the segment, this one is going to go to none other than Dalton LMAO, who says, do you guys think that Ukraine could intercept the ICBM before it actually struck Ukrainian territory?
Technically, that would be very unlikely, if not impossible, at least for Ukraine's abilities currently. On the other hand, for us, it actually would be slightly possible, but for Ukraine, entirely out of the picture. Nuclear weapons, such as this ICBM, are getting up into multiple dozens of Machs in speed. At their apogee, they are flying at about Mach 36, which is so fast. Well, not really at their apogee. At the very apex of their flight pattern, they are going to be the slowest, but we're still talking about multiple Mach in speed, so it's not going to be that slow. It's still going to be pretty significant. But beyond that, when it's coming down back into the atmosphere, re-entry does occur at dozens of Mach speed. The atmosphere does slow down the warheads, but these warheads would still be in the hypersonic category around Mach 7 when they're making impact, or somewhere around that area. Might be a little bit less, might be a little bit more. You could attempt to intercept these nuclear, well, not really nuclear warheads, but the delivery systems at the very end of their terminal phase, but that would be a little bit difficult to do, because it'd be very difficult to get a lock on them, for one, because they are coming in pretty much directly from overhead. Most radar systems really aren't designed to look directly overhead. Generally, they look out in kind of a cone shape, with the bottom of the cone pretty much being parallel to the tree line, and then the upper end of the cone looking upwards toward the sky, so there's actually a blind spot on most radar systems directly above them, although there are also radar systems that are designed to look directly overhead. Still, those are highly rare, well, at least not heavily used around Ukraine, because most air targets would be detected coming in from about 100 miles away, or 150 miles, or 200 miles away, and at a high altitude, at least with the drones. So those systems,
if the U.S. wanted to really jump in the situation, I guess we could actually try to shoot that down. Could we shoot it down with any systems that we have in Poland, perhaps? Like if we wanted to shoot the thing down under the guise of we're protecting our airspace, and we were concerned that maybe the Russian ICBM was going to head for NATO territory instead of Ukrainian territory, could we not just use some system in Poland to shoot it down and then claim that we had to?
We possibly could. But let's see here. It's designed to intercept ballistic missiles, which are honestly a little bit shorter range, really. They don't really say that this system is designed to intercept ICBMs. Not saying that it's out of the picture, or IRBMs for that matter. Not to say it's out of the picture, it's just that this system is the best one we have, and it really isn't even designed to do what we're claiming it could do. But holy smokes! Nicholas Condor just got us to the goal!
Hey, we smashed the goal. Let's go. Jugga, jugga.
Let's go, baby.
Man, we are well over 2,500 raised, and the goal has been smashed. And I love to see it. I love to see it.
I forgot to tell you, and Nicholas Condor, he's putting the meat on the fundraiser called the meatball, the way it's a spicy one. But beyond that, I gotta say, absolutely crazy right there. We just hit the fundraiser goal. Massive shout out, well, I almost choked in my spit right there, to all the folks who supported the fundraiser tonight, and Nicholas Condor for being the hero of the fundraiser and getting it on over the fundraiser goal. Absolutely incredible, folks. Absolutely amazing. But really quickly, before we get into the congratulations, I have to pull this up. Aegis Ashore ICBM interception. Let me see if it can. Let's see. Oh, let's see here. Actually, interestingly enough, the Aegis Ashore can intercept hypersonic targets. So that's a little interesting, Matt. You know how they always say, oh, the hypersonics, they're completely, there's no defense to them. It's like, well, the Aegis Ashore actually can. Like, that's kind of a little stupid that the Russians make these things out to be invincible, because it's like, even still, they weren't. And also, that was just proven. Like, they didn't make any, that was proven on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, because all of the vessels of the Navy these days, all of the refitted, modernized versions of the Arleigh Burkes and Ticonderogas, actually do have the Aegis Ashore systems on board onboard for the large part. They're carried in the vertical launch cells, and they do have the ability to detect and shoot down pretty much all the targets that the land-based systems are shooting down. But beyond that, they did prove without any modifications of the system that the Aegis Ashore can shoot down hypersonic targets. So with that in
It
mind,
would seem like if the United States wanted to one up Russia, because the whole reason why Russia would allegedly be shooting an ICBM at Ukraine is to scare the West. It would seem to be that the thing we should probably consider doing at least, or at least thought should be put into it, is maybe Poland using that system to shoot down the ICBM. Because once again, ICBMs are typically intended to go long distance. It's not intended to go as short range as hitting Ukraine. So I could see a very valid argument where NATO, being Poland, shoots that down over Ukraine before it reaches their territory, hypothetically speaking, and we make a point that way that we're not going to tolerate massive escalation, and we would have a reasonable justification for doing it, at least in my opinion.
so the only issue is that the Aegis Ashore system has a range of about 1,100 miles, at least publicly stated. I would assume that we were actually to get that out to its realistic abilities would probably be 1,200 or so, meaning that by the time it actually would be able to try and intercept the missile, considering that the mid-course would be somewhere halfway between Yekaterinburg and Kyiv, if that was the actual target, they probably would not be able to intercept it, at least at this moment, because it wouldn't be conducting its mid-course phase within range of Poland. So I would say that actually might be a bit of a stretch for them to do, at least in this particular instance, because the missile will mostly be out of range while it's in its mid-course. In its terminal phase, however, which is when it's re-entering, it would be within range, but at that point, it might be going too fast for the Aegis Ashore once again to intercept it, because that missile would have to have to fly quite a considerable distance, and at the exact same time, it would be re-entering at multiple Mach speed, at least the warheads would be. So I think that might be a little bit of a difficult one. It is possible, though, not completely out of the picture, but it would be a little bit more of a difficult one to pull off for the U.S. At least as far as Ukraine's internal abilities are concerned, the best air defense system they have is the Patriot defense system, or the air defense system, and there is no way in hell that a Patriot could ever really successfully intercept anything like that. Now, they have been able to intercept hypersonics, but those are technically only hypersonics in name, just to clarify that. Like I have to kind of go through this whole story. Russia has the Zircon and the Kinzhal, and the Kinzhal is really their first hypersonic, but the thing is that it's just a modified Iskander that flies at a slightly faster speed during its mid-course phase for the large part, which technically makes it hypersonic, but the thing is that once it enters its terminal phase, it's actually slowed down quite a bit, and it isn't really hypersonic at all, and it's easily intercepted by a Patriot, so it really isn't a hypersonic. On the other hand, Kinzhal interceptions have been fairly difficult. I think that we've only heard of one Kinzhal interception or two out of about the 20 or so fired into Ukraine. Once again, showing that the Kinzhal is more so a thoroughbred hypersonic missile in actual design. It is a little bit more difficult for an older system like the Patriot to be able to keep up with that kind of a missile. On the other hand, THAADs could most likely shoot that down, no matter what the Israelis say. Like, I don't care what they say, the THAAD can shoot that down. And the Aegis Ashore system could easily shoot down a hypersonic without really any issue. But the Ukrainians only have the Patriots, and the Patriots wouldn't really be able to pull that off. So I hope that does.
So based on what I'm reading here, it appears to be the Aegis Ashore generally has range all the way out beyond Kapustin Yar, which is the typical ICBM or IRBM launching site for Russia. Of course, Yekaterinburg is a little bit farther out than that, so they would have a bit of a problem with that. But it does cover the entirety of Ukraine and then well into Russia with the range of the system. And it looks like, according to Intel analysts, it can actually shoot down a ICBM or some type of IRBM missile if they chose to do so, depending on its trajectory, kind of like you're saying there a little bit. It says here, it doesn't actually give, it's apparently classified what it can actually target, but it appears to be, based on the very vague statements made by Intel officials, that it actually could shoot that down if they chose to. But once again, it's very vague because they keep a lot of details secret about that system. But let's see here. It says here, if you shot one defense missile against an incoming ICBM, your chances of shooting it down with the Aegis Ashore is about 53%. If you use 4 defense missiles, it goes up to about 97%. So Aegis Ashore has a theoretical ability to shoot down the ICBM coming in, but it wouldn't be a guarantee. It would be a hit or miss.
Also, we do have to remember that these Aegis Ashore systems do have a limited supply of missiles. It's not an infinite amount. So there would be a point, much
24.
like the... Let's say what?
It's 24 in total, SM3s.
So with 24 missiles, and it takes 4 to shoot down an ICBM. Each Aegis Ashore system, and there's only 2 in Europe at the moment, would be able to intercept. Let's see here. Let's do some maths, Matthew. Some quick maths. 6 ICBMs apiece. So that means in total, all the American air defense systems that are capable of shooting down an ICBM would only be able to shoot down 12 of them before they became overrun. So not really a lot when you think about it. And they're also very expensive. SM-3s are not cheap. SM-3s cost, I think, $3 million a piece. So it's like throwing a whole Abrams at each ICBM. And then also you have to do it 4 times over. So the reality of intercepting an ICBM is that it costs approximately $12 million, which is only $8 million short of the actual cost of an RS-24 Yars in the first place. And also that would be considered a hostile act if we shot down that missile.
It would be considered hostile, but if we had the right justification, like let's say we theoretically thought it was coming for NATO territory, we could much more easily justify shooting it down, but there is, of course, a risk for escalation with that. But another problem is this. Depending on what type of ICBM, and we believe it's the RS-26, I believe. I think that's the name of the model designation of the ICBM.
What
was that?
RS-24.
RS-24.
Yes.
So depending on what type of warhead, even if it isn't necessarily loaded with explosives or some type of munition, it may be a multiple reentry warhead, a MIRV system that has multiple different pieces that come down and actually strike the target, like we saw with the IRBM. So if it has a multiple reentry system, that makes it extremely hard to shoot all those down, because the whole point of that system is to overwhelm a defense system like Aegis Ashore or THAAD. So that would be problematic. So they would have to shoot the thing down before it got into that separation stage, or at that point, you're basically in a futile effort at that point.
But the thing is, the good thing is that the Aegis Ashore is designed to intercept these missiles in their mid-course phase, and at that point, none of the independent reentry vehicles, even the autonomous ones, have been deployed. So in theory, they should be able to actually shoot it down, because if the missile is hit and the trajectory of the MIRV or MARV delivery system is thrown off because of the explosion, it will not deploy and arm its nuclear warheads, because it would not be able to actually hit its target properly. So it's not really like a Japanese bonsai system from World War II where it's like drop them anyways and just hope, because that could end up backfiring. Because say that the actual SM-3 hit the ICBM in a way that it actually elevated the flight or the trajectory or orbital path or the decay high enough that this MIRV or MARV actually deposited its nuclear weapons to where they randomly landed over China or Kazakhstan or Russia. So that would be a considerable threat. So with the SM-3, you would need 4 interceptors, even for all of those independent warheads, because it would be intercepting and shooting down that ICBM before the MIRV had an actual ability to deploy the independent reentry vehicles.
Interesting. And also, by the way, I was trying to do some quick looking here between the THAAD and the Aegis Ashore. It has been said before that the THAAD system can 100% intercept the RS-26, not with a 100% success rate. It has the ability to strike those RS-26, which are the ones we were referring to right now. But of course, it comes with a bit of a margin of error there. No system is perfect when it comes to shooting down these ICBMs, because of course, they're very fast, very high altitude, and once again, they may have multiple reentry vehicle warheads on board. So that makes them very hard to shoot down. That's the entire point of an ICBM, is not to be able to be shot down. So, and also to go super long range. So that would be interesting. A THAAD system actually has a good chance. I'm trying to compare the THAAD versus Aegis Ashore. What is the efficacy rate of both? But I'm not getting that data right off the bat. It could be either closely guarded information, or either it's just not publicly available. But let's see here. I'm trying to do some research on the spot.
Also, the THAAD is like not even in the same category as the Aegis. The Aegis is using large caliber, long range interceptors like the SM-3. The THAAD is using a shorter range interceptor. It is capable of conducting exo-atmospheric interceptions, but in an incredibly shorter range than the Aegis. The Aegis, I think, has a range of about 1,200 to 1,400 miles. At least that's what's stated to the public. And I think the THAAD, at its furthest distance, has an interception range of about 200 to 240 miles or so.
Yeah, I'm looking here. It appears to be the THAAD system would have higher rates of efficacy with shooting down very rudimentary IRBMs or ICBMs, and they would have to be without the MIRV system. So it can shoot them down in theory and with a pretty decent success rate, like above 50% or higher, but it's not a guarantee, and also it has to be very rudimentary. Aegis appears to be a lot more effective. I would assume maybe 15-20% or something like that to shoot down these ICBMs. But once again, I'm not sure if there's ever actually been a real world scenario where it's been used in that capacity or not. I think it might just be based on data they've compiled. Have we actually used Aegis to shoot down an ICBM in the testing or anything like that?
We haven't used any of our systems before to attempt a shoot down of an ICBM, so all of it's theoretical.
Yeah, and that's problematic. Also, if we decided to use the Aegis in Poland to try to shoot down an ICBM that was going toward Ukraine and hypothetically found a justification for it, that would also finally give us a real world test to see how well that system actually works and whether or not we've overestimated its capabilities in the event that Russia decides to launch a nuclear attack on the West. Because, of course, that possibility is rising every single day. So that might be interesting to see as well.
I'm trying to see really quickly if I can get y'all an idea of how big these missiles are that the SM-3 system is using. The SM-2 is kind of similar. That actually isn't a good picture because you really can't get a comparison of scale here. Dang, this is a tough one. Is there any pictures of anyone standing near one of these things? Because they are massive. If y'all saw one, y'all would be blown away. But these things, just to kind of like give a rough estimate for everyone, that thing right there is about the size of a 3-story building. So these are not small missiles. These are quite significant in size, and they are quite expensive. Now, there actually is one air defense system that no one has talked about so far. It isn't land-based, and it's the whole reason why I pulled up these ships. It actually is the Navy. The Navy probably has the best ability to intercept any kind of ICBMs or IRBMs that would be launched anywhere in the world, because every single Ticonderoga class cruiser and a decent amount of the Arleigh Burkes actually are roaming Aegis Ashore systems, and they carry a significant number of SM-3s. Pretty much in the modern day, a lot of these cruisers and destroyers are built with air defense in mind primarily. These ships are designed to not get hit, and so everything revolving around them relies on minimal armor, advanced computer systems, and the most advanced kinds of missiles that can really be deployed anywhere in the world. And these are usually held inside the vertical launch cells of a Ticonderoga class cruiser or an Arleigh Burke, which is the mainstay of our service fleet here in the U.S. Navy. So with that in mind, these things are able to carry a wide variety, an insane amount of these SM-3s. You can actually fit, theoretically, 122 SM-3s onto a single Ticonderoga. So this thing has quite a good bit of firepower in the air defense role.
Very interesting. Also, by the way, I see people pointing out there is a third system which can be used to defend against ICBMs. This is something that would not be available for the situation if Russia fired an ICBM at Ukraine, but the United States uses what's called a GMD, a ground-based mid-course defense, which is something that we use here domestically in the United States. We have them based in California and Alaska, and we have interceptors which are much more capable than the Aegis or the THAAD. They can intercept these ICBMs coming into our airspace here in America. But the problem is, though, the only thing that Ukraine has at their disposal right now, that's only if the United States let them use it, would be the Aegis system with the SM-3 interceptors, which is a lot less effective than the GMD, the ground-based system that the United States airspace uses to defend itself. Also, by the way, the range difference between the THAAD and Aegis is massive. 200 kilometers is about the range of the THAAD system, which is much shorter than the Aegis, which is about, I believe, let's see here, about 2,500 kilometers with the Aegis. So THAAD is like the baby boy system. The Aegis is the medium boy system. And then the big boy system is the GMDs that the United States has access to.
And these are quite big. Like, these are like the size of a Mercury, like a Mercury rocket from the Mercury program in NASA's earlier days. These are about that size. And these are actually rated to deal with ICBMs.
Yeah, those appear to be the most effective, even though those aren't perfect. Like, they're not a 100% guaranteed accuracy rate, but those are the most effective.
And also, another thing is that this is very limited number and largely really would only be able to deal with rogue states because they only have 44 interceptors in total, meaning that if you were to fire a single one or two at every single incoming ICBM, we only have enough of these missiles to deal with 22 ICBMs before the system is overrun and no longer has interceptors to be able to deal with the incoming target. So this really is a system that is specifically designed informed to just deal with North Korea, because that's the only country that possesses such a small number of ICBMs that we would be able to deal with it and pretty much get away scot-free. Anyone larger than that, the Chinese or the Russians, we would actually have a considerable issue. Hell, even Britain and France actually would have so many ICBMs, it would actually overrun the GMD system here in America. So that's some, Mandy, that's actually something that will require a good amount of money right there. It's like, shouldn't we be putting more money into this system, considering that it can pretty much completely remove the threat of dealing with an ICBM attack from the continental U.S.?
Well, I think what the United States is hedging its bets on is that the nuclear weapons probably will never be used. So they have some of these GMDs to prepare for that unlikely scenario, but they're more interested in putting money into things like the Golden Dome system, which is more of a smaller defense system, which is more about shooting down drones and smaller targets than they are shooting down massive ICBMs. Because at the point that ICBMs get fired, that's pretty much a nuclear annihilation scenario. So that means everybody's getting nukes fired at everybody, and it's going to hell in a handbasket. So they're not really too worried about it. They need some for defense, but not a whole bunch. But the interesting thing is, though, this GMD system right here, which appears to be the most effective nuclear deterrent system, was actually going to be put in Poland back in 2009. They canceled it for an unknown and undisclosed reason, but we were going to put a GMD system right in Poland alongside the Aegis Ashore system. But we ended up settling just on the Aegis and got rid of the GMD. We didn't put that one in Poland.
I wonder how much these systems cost, because there has to be some sort of a public cost analysis.
It looks like 3.5 billion a site. Two missile defense sites, 3.5 billion.
That's actually wildly cheap.
I wouldn't call that cheap. I mean, that's pretty steep.
Yeah, that's really cheap, man. Think about it. Like that is about the quarter of a cost of an aircraft carrier right there.
Yeah, I guess. But let's see here. That's only like 2 interceptors, though. I mean, that's not a whole lot.
Well, no, that's not 2 interceptors. That's like what is it? At least at this one main site, 40 were staged in Alaska. So it's 3.5 billion, I suppose, for 40 interceptors. That's not bad at all.
Well, we have in total, apparently, from what I'm reading here, about 44 ground-based ones, and that's amongst the 2 different bases that currently house them. So it appears to be a much smaller number just on one facility alone.
Yeah, only 4 are staged in California and 40 are staged in Alaska. But if the average cost of each base is $3.5 billion, it seems as though that's just the cost of the base itself and not the missiles housed at them. And so I'm guessing that we could just expand the amount of missiles available at any given facility and expand them out to well enough abilities that we could see that, hell, really honestly, just these GMDs could deal with most incoming threats from even the Chinese, because the Chinese don't have a massive ICBM arsenal either.
Yeah, pretty much. I think you're onto something there.
I think we are. But we'll have to save that for the question segment because we are getting well behind on the news, and we want to make sure to get to the news for all of y'all. But this is a very deep and interesting kind of a rabbit hole that we got into, and we're learning as much as y'all are learning right now on this as well. But moving on from that and on into the remainder of the news tonight, we have been able to hear inside of Libya that they are continuing to have fun in the sun in Tripoli. This guy sounds as terrified as the people he's probably shooting at, and he's the one shooting it.
Oh, jeez.
Bro, this guy's about to go, oh my god, chat, this is crazy, chat.
This guy's tweaking.
Bro, I think he's putting out some gas on the on whoever he's firing at, and he also got gassed up before he got on this thing. Go. Bro, they just slammed on the brakes.
Oh, jeez. They put us on Snapchat of all places, too.
Oh, someone's calling him in the middle of this. Did you hear that?
Yeah, they're like, hey, bro, we don't have those Baofeng comms, but I'm just going to call you up on the cell phone when we need you to move positions.
Listen to this.
This is the most janky fighting I've ever seen.
Man, a ghetto gush gun before we got GTA 6, and I had to say that because Joshua G said, "I'm so glad the such and such before GTA 6 jokes have gone away," and you thought they did, but they're back, and they're back with a passion. Moving on from that though, and into North Korea, we also got to see in Pyongyang that there was a bit of a development that happened today with the Fat Men. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un oversaw Air Force drills focused on anti-air combat and air raid responses, calling for stronger and constant war readiness across all military units. The exercises tested new long-range guided bombs, drone defenses, and precision attacks on naval targets. Kim, the Fat Man, emphasized enhancing air defense, electronic warfare, and anti-drone systems. I'm sure he came up with all that on his own because he's just truly genius. He was joined by senior military and party officials, including Ri Pyong-chol and Kim Yong-hwan. Kim calls the drills valuable for improving modern air combat skills and urged a radical turn in overall war preparedness. We can also see them standing in front of a direct copy of a U.S. Global Hawk.
Oh my God, man! It really is it's literally our exact system. Like, what are they calling that?
They're probably calling that the Fat Man's eyeball in the sky. I bet. Like it's just like,
Man, like let's see, wing short 5,000, wing long 5,000, something like that. Honestly, though, that is so like. Have they announced that system before, or is that the first time we're seeing it?
Oh, well, they've announced this a while ago. We actually covered it here on the channel, I think, like a year ago or so.
That's insane to have anything like that. That's honestly kind of wild.
Dude, I need to go pull up the North Korean Global Hawk. North Korean Global Hawk. Here we go. What's it called? Let's see. No way, they literally called it like an RQ-4, which is the actual designation for the Global Hawk, but they called it the Sitebyo 4.
The Sitebyo 4. That's insane. It says it features an image. It's like, is it a mock-up or is it real, or like that's crazy.
It's apparently real because here's an actual video of it flying, and I remember that they showed that at the parade at one point.
The only difference between ours and theirs is like the front like nose part of theirs looks like a humpback whale and ours doesn't.
Also, man, notice how the wings don't even match the fuselage and paint job. They ran out of primer, so they just didn't paint the fuselage. All they did was paint the wings, and then later on in later pictures, you can see that they did paint the whole thing properly.
Oh, they sure did. Somewhat. I think the wings are still kind of more white than the rest of it, but yeah, that's crazy. They've got that. It seems kind of wild that they have anything that's even remotely close to what we have.
This is probably the only one in the country, though.
Yeah, but I mean, just the fact they got one is insane.
Hold up, wait a minute. We might be able to track down the numbers here. Let's see, 002. Oh, so wait a minute, they may have changed the serial. Wait a minute, hold up. So they're either wanting us to believe that there's multiple of these, because notice that there are two prevailing serial numbers, 21070601 and 2102002. I'm thinking that they're probably the same drone, however, and they're just being renumbered time and time again to make it look like there's more of them. But I would assume there's probably only one of these things, because it would be pretty hard for North Korea to develop more than one. Although they may just be lackluster in abilities as well. And also, let's see here. Hold up. Can we get the serial number on this one? Huh. I can't tell if that's supposed to be the American one or not to really make a comment here. But anyways, we're going to be moving on from this, because we also got to see that they came up with another ingenious creation today. This. Whoa. No way.
Oh no, they've got a missile.
They've got glide bombs and an AMRAAM. That is just crazy. Crazy stuff. You know what's crazy about this, though, is that this is supposed to be their semi-active radar homing missile, kind of like an AIM-120, and they said that North Korea designed this thing entirely on their own. But when I looked at it, I said, nah, they lying. That's a damn PL-12. And it sure as hell was exactly a PL-12, literally down to the actual fins and everything. An identical copy.
Oh yeah, sure is. They probably got it straight from them too.
Yeah, they probably got it straight from the Chinese, because it would make no sense that they would be able to develop a semi-active radar homing missile on their own. So it appears that the Chinese gave them the tech to make one, and they're just license building them. But also, the PL-12 is a ripoff of an AIM-120. So it's a ripoff of a ripoff of a ripoff. This is the original. This is the best. Then the Chinese made their ripoff, the PL-12, which is made by the Chinese Aviation Company, which is what AVIC stands for. And now the North Koreans are making their ripoff of the AIM-120, which I don't know what they're calling their missile, but it's pretty much the same thing. And it also appears they're trying to make GBU-39 glide bombs as well. So are these going to be in large number? No. Or is it interesting to see that North Korea has one at all? Yes. Moving on from that, though, and out of all the North Korean news that we've been able to get today from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, it is now time for us to move on into the rest of the news for the night, starting in Europa, where we were able to hear that the Rheinmetall and Lockheed Martin companies will be planning to establish large-scale productions of TACMS missiles as well as SAMs for the Patriot Pack-3 in Europe. So I guess you could say, Europa, so because the Europeans are going to be producing their thing. I had to stop there because I was like, I don't know if a lot of our American viewers are going to be getting that joke, but there was this whole like song called Europapa last year, like the I forgot what it's called, but it's like Eurovision or whatever. And there was this guy who like had this weird suit on. He was singing this song, and then I think he punched someone backstage, and then he got disqualified. But I always think of that song because I always think about that guy doing like that weird little dance and then punching someone right back like behind the scenes. But anyways, moving on from that, it's now time for us to move on into the Ukrainian news, as we were able to hear that Ukrainian recon flights have resumed with our real Global Hawks, the RQ-4Bs. Hey, and they're conducting orbits pretty far away though from the area of Crimea, but it does appear that we are beginning our surveillance flights once more. Meanwhile, we were also able to hear in the Kursk and Belgorod area that the largest drone attack of the war has occurred on the state of Ukraine, as last night Russia launched 273 drones against the state of Ukraine. This is the largest attack of this kind since the start of the full-scale war. It further paraphrases the trend that since the president took office, the attacks have been more frequent. Fortunately, the drones are still made in Russia, meaning that very little of them made it through. Beyond that, analysts did say that the Ukrainian Istanbul talks proved Putin's ambition to re-establish the Soviet bloc, and attacks like these are just trying to further that attempt to show a sign of strength so that way they can make that a reality. And it appears that many people are agreeing that Putin is just starting. Others are saying that he's focused on Ukraine only, and some are saying that it's a little hard to tell. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so it looks like 73% said I agree, Putin is just starting, while 13% said I disagree, he's focused on Ukraine, and 8% said seems too early to tell. And I would say that that's been the objective the entire time, is Putin wants to move on beyond Ukraine. But of course, he got a little bogged down and a little sidetracked in Ukraine because he couldn't quite pull off the 3-day operation he was wanting, and it turned into the 3-year operation. So that put a bit of a kink in the plans, but he's still focused on retaking the Soviet bloc. That is still his ambition. And one way or another, he's going to try to see that through before this is all over. And that's why he was not willing to entertain peace talks, and he's not willing to agree to a ceasefire, because if he were to do that, he would be abandoning those ambitions. So I agree 100%. I think I'm definitely with the 72%. Putin is just starting. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that, in my opinion, I would agree that Putin is just starting. They do have they have an idea or an ambition of creating a larger sphere, and Ukraine is only the first part of it. But moving on from that and into the rest of the news that we had, we were able to see inside the Kursk Oblast that the Ukrainians were continuing to hit Russian forces and knock them out pretty well. Also, knocking out that bass. They got that loud drum and bass, baby. But we can see them here, the targeting this Russian van, believe it. And someone just found out what analysis is. Dude, your analysis is based on speculation. You have no clue. I don't know if you know how analysis works, because if we knew what was happening, then it wouldn't be analysis, it would be fact. But analysis is trying to take what we know and trying to come up with the most likely option. That's what analysis is, buddy. So I hope you learned a little bit about the English language today. But meanwhile, we also got to see them continuing to hit supply trucks. They are hitting them quite significantly. And a good night to BC Skyman. A good night to you. I hope you sleep well. Good night. And you, sir, are you ready to receive my pillow and blanket? How dare you, sir? Get your hands off me. But we can see that they were able to destroy a significant number of these equipments. And I got to tell y'all, folks, without Matthew laughing at my jokes, I always feel like they're falling flat. I don't know if they're funny or not. But anyways, with that, we're going to be moving on from that clip and on into the next one, where we also got to see in the Belgrade area, Ukrainian special forces on some move. And they were in the move in some muddy conditions, some wet conditions. And here's the clip.
Брык есть.
it's quite murky.
Looks like Vietnam.
Man, it's just giving you flashbacks to Call of Duty Cold War.
I don't know. Whenever I'm watching this, I'm just thinking about, you know, taking Shawty to the swamp.
Man, no, wait, I gotta do it right, man. We gotta do it right. Water, taking Shawty to the swamp.
Really, this is a bad swamp.
Yeah, this is rough. From what I was able to tell, this is somewhere near to the active front right now. Between let me make sure I'm getting this right here. Yeah, I did zoom in on the right spot. Somewhere around Grafovka. Well, I don't want to give exact locations, but somewhere around this area, or Dimidovka, which apparently is mired with a decent amount of swamp. So it appears that they're in Broward County, where the mountains are made of trash, and they're also taking Shodi to the swamp.
I don't know if they got moccasins in that water.
Man, I wonder, man, aren't those things that those that the Dutch people wear? You know, like those big, giant, like wooden shoes.
Concrete galoshes?
No, I think that's a mafia thing. I think that's
well.
I think that's like mafia shoes, dude. Like honestly, man, I don't know why all those mobsters are wearing like concrete shoes. Like I feel like that'd be kind of heavy. Like you really wouldn't be able to swim. But you know,
that was the point. Yeah, they threw in there with those concrete galoshes on, and they didn't come back up.
Bro, it's supposed to be like a joke. Like you just explain it. You're like, no, man, they're actually trying to kill people. I was sitting there. I was gonna make like a obviously stupid like assessment. I think you came in with a real answer. I was like, bro.
They're trying to drown him, man. Didn't you know?
Man, I knew, man, but that was, you know, it was supposed to be like, you know, like it was kind of like supposed to be like a man. Anyways.
Oh, yeah.
And also, everyone's telling me that those Dutch-made shoes, they're called clogs. And I don't think they are, folks, because I think that the Dutch actually have a pretty good drainage system in their country. I don't think they deal with a lot of clogs, really. Also, man, this is that standing water that everyone on TikTok will tell you will kill you.
Oh, yes, that like leech brain, like water, like that little bacteria that gets up and like eats your like brain matter apart and stuff, and then you start going crazy and stuff.
Man, it eats your brain matter apart. But what really is in the brain that matters?
Well, you know, brain matters.
Man, that's true. But anyways, moving on to the rest of the clip. And then we get the slaw at the end. But anyways, moving on from that into the next clip, we also get to see them clearing some Russians out. In the 225th Battalion, take a look at this. Clearing out this skimpy little tree line. And we can see that the Russians are walking on out. Actually crawling out. Dang, look, there's a clown car in there. Like, I don't know where they're coming from. There's like 10 of them right there. Holy smokes!
Social distancing. Make sure you keep 6 feet apart. Don't get too bunched together. It's not good.
Look at them. They're coming out of that hole like a bunch of stupid babies. Gucci goo, Gucci goo. You know, so you know, they've been drinking the water from the muddle puddles, and I gotta tell you that they're probably having mental issues. They need to eat more
jump in that
peanuts.
polluted river and swim up and down it. You know, the river that's polluted is good for building up resistance.
I gotta send my kids to the beach that makes you old. But anyways, moving on from that.
They said, look for the fountain of youth, and they were wrong the whole time. They've been trying to keep it secret. It's the fountain of old.
They try and tell you the secrets to longevity is having a good diet, but the reality is that you rub yourself up with peanut butter oil and you run around Central Park at night throwing bears onto bicycles. That's the reality, folks. Get with it. But anyways, moving on from that and on into the location unknown, so we did get to see a new Leopard 1 that might be given to Ukraine, which is actually a really impressive little thing. Look at that right there.
Oh no, that is nice right there. That's a very nice looking thing they've got right there. I'm glad they're sending it.
Now, you know what's interesting about the system, Matthew, is that the turret is an unmanned autoloader.
Unmanned autoloader. Those I've heard good and bad things about that. I'm not sure if that's a great thing.
These actually are starting to become a little bit of the future. Like we've actually seen that these are starting to catch on a good bit. And so we don't know how well it will do, but the Belgians are talking about sending these to Ukraine, and I'd like to see how they work because it looks neat for one, and two, considering that the turret is unmanned, that would be an incredibly cool kind of a thing to see in work. But anyways. With that, we're going to be moving on to our next clip, where we also get to see the Ukrainians destroying a Russian heavy bomber. Okay, we're going to be muting the funk. Dude, I wish we could play that clip, man, that you showed me earlier, man. Those people wailing on that guy. Like, that was funny.
Yeah. Oh, and also Gachulian343 said, don't autoloaders tend to go boom? I think autoloaders tend to make people's heads go boom. Like, if you accidentally get in the way of an autoloader, I think you can get pretty badly mangled by it to a very, very bad extent. So I think that's a downside to it. Is you got to be careful, like, for the crew that is still left inside the tank.
But it's generally safe. You know, you just got to practice the rules of heavy machinery. Don't put your head where you wouldn't put your other one. Get it? But moving on from that, we also got to see that the Russians are putting the cripples into the meat grinder.
Вот с такими мы и воюем. 119-й полк, блядь.
Plug walk.
Was a guy pushing 90?
Полчаса шел.
Was he using a board for a crutch?
It looks like it 2x4 actually.
Ой, блядь.
Wow.
And moving on from that and into the Russian casualty report, it appears that the losses were still pretty decent today. Holy smokes, no Bobcats!
Oh,
what
no
the hell?
Bobcats at all. None today, but we'll get some later, sooner or later. You know, they always get a few extra here and there, but tell us more.
And Miss Disa, keeper of the records, was able to tell us more. Troop losses are up again over 1,000, but all others are below the 7-day averages. Tanks are a rare breed, but beyond that, they are not thoroughbred. Of losses, as AFVs are also way lower. The correct total for anti-aircraft is 1,167. No change from yesterday. Now, let's get on down into the actual numbers. 1,130 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 4 APCs, 91 supply trucks, 1 main battle tank, 38 artillery pieces, 107 drones, 1 MLRS, and nothing else. Beyond that, it was a fairly decent day, and we were able to see that the Ukrainians were inflicting these losses wherever they could. In the town of Veluki, we were able to see that 2 Russian miners, and those are the guys who work underground, not the children, were watching as a drone was attacking the Russians inside of the town. Take a look at this. There it is. It's lighting up.
It's a UFO.
Dude, in America, someone would be going, look, Janice, look. I don't think that's a UFO. Yes, it is. Yes, it is a UFO. Like, it's a... Oh, man.
Oh my God! Look, Bill, it's a UFO.
Whoa!
Oh my God, Bill, the UFO just attacked that building.
Bro, that's like a real thing that someone would say here in America. Or dude, they would go, oh my God, wow, oh my God. It's like sometimes, dude, people just literally say the same thing like in every single way they can, and that's like their reaction.
The average American reaction to something like that. Oh my God, yo, what the funk? What is going on? Oh my God, bro, look.
Oh my God, bro. Oh my God, bro. Bro. Yo, oh my God. Dude. Like, it's like they never get to what they're trying to say. It's just like a whole preamble to it. And then eventually someone will be like, what happened? The bomb. It went off. Oh my God. Like, anyways, moving on from that and on to the Svatove area, we did get to see a Ukrainian Caesar firing at the Russians.
Так, Мишаня! Сейчас буду ебашить.
Oh,
See, man, autoloaders are good. Of the band.
Пішов кабанчик корком на спини.
give him the shell right now.
Bro. Man, still pretty impressive to see the Caesars at work, and the Ukrainians will be getting more of them throughout the year. Meanwhile, we also get to see a small clip from the defenders of Bila Orivka. We can see him here looking up from his trench into Slag Heap. That's Chris's mom right there.
Ukraine here?
Watch out, Matthew. We might have another community post directed at us with a link not describing anything, but pretty much sending over a community brigade again for that one. Be careful. But moving on from that and on towards Chasiv Yar, we also got to see the Ukrainians using a Humvee MLRS, which is pretty cool.
That's unusual.
That's unusual. I would agree. It is cool looking though, but unusual. We also were able to hear that unfortunately in the area of the Druzhivka Rudinsky highway, it appears that Russian drones are actually able to hit this far back from the front. This is a fairly new development showing that the Russians are actually starting to possess longer range drones, similar to the kind of drones that the Ukrainians have possessed for nearly 2 years of the war at this point. This is going to start posing greater issues for Ukrainian logistics, as it's going to make it a lot harder to get completed logistics orders to the front to the troops that need the supplies. So we'll have to see how this affects the Ukrainian defenders in the area. Meanwhile, we were also able to see in Touretsk the ongoing fighting in the city. We can hear him moving some plastic as he starts walking through the building. You see him looking outside. Ah, yes, North Birmingham, a fairly common sight. Like, that's it, man. I also hear an explosion out there. But that's the end of the clip. Moving on from that, we also were able to see the remains of Touretsk from above again. We've seen a lot of these clips being published recently, so we'll show about a minute of it. But the destruction of Touretsk is significant. We can also see a slag heap right over there to the right.
Yo, is that a gorilla with a helmet on in the bottom right?
Yes.
Damn.
I don't really know what kind of comment to make about that. Like I really don't. But we can also see.
You heard me for a minute. I looked down. I was like, "Oh my god, what is that?" I thought it was a ghost.
Ooh. I've come to. I don't even know. Like I don't even know. Anyways, like we can see the Russians getting slammed by the Ukrainians down low. Down on the land, down under. The city has been destroyed quite significantly. But we are going to be ending this clip a little bit short because we still have more news to cover, but still generally giving y'all a gist of what Touretsk is looking like these days. Meanwhile, near Novobad-Makivka, we were able to see that another Russian assault in this area was stopped by affirmative Ukrainian action of the 91st Ukrainian Brigade. Take a look at this. We can see Russian sheds driving through the fields. Soon they will blow up. Oh, look, a little Russian man getting hit with the mortar rounds, blade. Oh.
They said in Ukraine they want to pass new bill for affirmative action. They said in the United States it's controversial. In Ukraine it's a definite thing. We're going to take affirmative action on the Russians.
Here's why Ukrainian affirmative action is the best in the world. We take out Russians every day in the thousands.
They don't get political in Ukraine. They only get more feisty.
Here in Ukraine, this is why we are the best in the world. We hit the Russians where they don't expect it, and that is not in their balls, but in their engine bay, which is practically like the crotch of a vehicle. But moving on from that, and on into the next clip, we also were able to see Russian logistics being destroyed by the Phoenix unit.
Affirmative action in action.
Here we can see the unit emblem of the Phoenix is a eagle giving a dab. Very hardcore. Very dope. Very dank.
All inclusive. DJIs. All types. Homemade. Homegrown. All of the above.
Here in Ukraine, we don't need Putinov to tell us what we're hitting. We already know. There goes Kyle sober, who is not sober, he's actually drunk. Ukraine is not our problem, man. Man. Anyways, we can see the Russians tossing it straight.
That dude thought he was going to come in here and pull one of those like Costco tables up and put the table spread over it that says
Change my
"Debate me
mind."
on this topic,
Yeah.
change my mind" or something. It's like, bro, this is not like a college sidewalk. This is a YouTube chat.
Blood thought he was Charlie Kirk walking up in here like that. Like, get the
Captain
hell out of
Kirk.
here, man.
Get out of here.
Bro, gonna walk in here with that small face. Like, actually, and like when you ever think about anything, like we were in no wars, it's like, is that really a good thing though? It's like, is that really a good thing? Like, not that I'm a warmonger or anything, but it's like sometimes wars are worth fighting. So it's like, is that always a good thing? Because me personally, I don't think it is. Like, that's like, oh, we fought no wars. Well, like, what about the Nazis? Well, honestly, we gave them a pass. It's like, wait, it's like some wars are worth fighting. That's my thought on that. But anyways, we also get to see the Ukrainians clearing the town of Yekaterinburg. Check it out. They were wiping their feet on the flag of Russia. It says Russia on the flag right there, because some Russians are illiterate. They don't really know Russia's Russia, so they had to put Russia in Russian on the flag with a giant double-headed eagle and the Russian flag on it to confirm that it is Russian. And the Ukrainians are using it as toilet paper.
Look at them wiping their boots on it. Look at that. Nice cleaning, Matt.
Nice cleaning, Matt.
Oh,
man.
Whoa.
The Ukrainians are posing for quite a while here, actually. Probably trying to get a good picture. And now you see them picking it up and carting it off to be turned into trash.
It's already that.
And there's the Ukrainian flag in exchange. Well, moving on from that, on to the next clip further on down the line, we also were able to hear that some explosions were reported near Dzhankoy, which we were able to see right here. Take a look at that. Take a gander at that. Really impressive stuff. Really like to see it. And of course, we don't have any video or picture evidence yet, but we were able to hear about it, and that was enough. But meanwhile, we also were able to hear of the air defense report as well, as 273 drones were launched last night. 88 of them were shot down directly by Ukrainian air defense. 123 were taken down by electronic warfare measures. So the interception rate was on up there, but there were still about 80 drones that made it through, which is quite a significant hit for the Russians to score overnight. Nevertheless, that is the end of the news for the day. That's actually moving us on to the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to each and every one of y'all. And boy howdy, folks, what a segment it is. We don't have a speech from Zelensky again today. He's pretty much taking a break from doing those for I don't know how long. As Al Rose throws in the 333.
Whoa.
Holy smokes! We just hit $3,133 raised in this fundraiser. Holy smokes. That is amazing. Incredible stuff. And an amazing way to round out this news segment is we are going to be moving on into the second segment of this stream, where we get to talk to all of y'all. And we also have this amazing poll that we put up only 6 minutes ago that's gotten 671 votes that says Ukraine reports Russia is using longer-range drones launched from motherships. And this is a crisis for Ukraine. And it seems as though a decent amount of people are saying that Ukraine will adapt very quickly. Others are saying that Ukraine will be at a disadvantage. Others are saying that it will be a minor setback. And others are saying that they are unsure and undecided. But Matthew, what are you thinking about it? And what is everyone else thinking about it as well? Tell us.
So it looks like 47% of the audience said no, Ukraine will adapt very quickly to these new mothership fiber optic drones, while 27% said yes, Ukraine will be at a disadvantage, and 17% said it'll only be a minor setback. And I'm going to say this is going to be a short-term crisis for Ukraine, because these new drones appear to have a much longer range on them, which of course will disrupt logistics. Also, they are fiber optic, so they're not really prone to being jammed by the Ukrainians. And also, they're being launched from a mothership, meaning they can launch a whole bunch of them and put it way behind the lines and then start putting individual drones into the air. So it is a bit of a problem in the short term, but Ukraine's been extremely quick to adapt to new technology that they're confronted with. And of course, Ukraine's had their own version of this to a large extent for quite some time. So the Russians just caught up, but now the Ukrainians have to learn how to defend against it now that this has been approached in the battlefield. So I'm going to be with the 47%. I think they'll adapt very quick. But Enforcer, what say you?
I think they're going to adapt fairly quickly. The Ukrainians are always quick to innovate in the drone warfare and anti-drone warfare fields. And so I have a feeling that the Russians will keep an upper hand on this for maybe about a month or two. And by then, the Ukrainians will have some sort of a comparable thing to either defend against them with, or to attack the Russians even harder with their own drone warfare abilities. Because sometimes a great defense is a strong offense, folks. We all know that. But with that, It is time for us to get on into the second question segment. But before we do, Matthew, have we had any more top donors between the last segment and this one to recognize and thank for their support to the amazing fundraiser that we ran tonight for Revive Soldiers of Ukraine?
So yes, we have. And our top donors of the last segment here goes to Hal Rose, who puts in a 333 that we just called off a moment ago. And huge shout out to Hal for the largest donation of the night. Also, a big shout out to Nicholas Condor, who threw in a $250 donation, also massive, along with BZ Skyman, who put in a 100, and Greg Carrier, who also put in a 100, along with Charles Hazlitt, who put in a 50. And a huge shout out to all 5 or 6 of our top donors I just called off, and to everybody else as well for throwing in the massive support tonight to the fundraiser to get us up to $3,133 raised. Tremendous to see, and I love to see it. But Enforcer, what say you?
And we love to see it, folks. We love to see it. We love to see the return of channel legend names like BC Scammon and Nicholas Condor and Hal Rose to these amazing fundraisers here. We thank you all so much once again for supporting all the massive donations, and the little ones all come together to make these fundraisers possible each and every single night. And we thank you all massively for not only hitting the fundraiser goal, but surpassing it a good amount once again, surpassing it by $633. Truly an amazing thing. And I got to give a huge thanks to all of y'all so much once again. And in honor of that, we will be making sure to get as many questions from all of y'all as we can, so that way we can chit chat with all of y'all about all kinds of different things. So with that, Matthew, what do we got? What do we have?
All right. Also, by the way, do you know why the Russians call their drone system a mothership and not a fathership?
Because they never grew up with a father.
Yeah, I mean, that could be part of the issue, but they have a big problem with that now because all the fathers are being sent off to war, so they don't want to cause any ruffled feathers, so they say mothership because it's more comforting. But anyways, jumping into our first, actually not our first live chat question, but actually into our Morse code decode of the night, we had Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Kevin J, Paul Shaw, Dave Millsaps, Her Royal Fluffiness, Arabelle Garbo, Johnny Dog, and Norm Pritchett. They said the Morse code decode for the day says Russia is going to keep acting like a clown until the economy falls out under them, and LLT LSA.
And ding. That doesn't sound muddy. And I got to say, y'all are dead on the nail with that. And I think the Russians are probably going to have around and find out is what they say. Because, you know, it's funny that the Russian economy is going through apocalyptic conditions, according to even industrial agricultural machinery manufacturers. And yet the Russians keep playing like they're a big money player out there, almost living life like Andrew Tate. It doesn't realize that he's really disliked by most people, but still pretending like he's a big hustler. That's pretty much the Russian mindset these days. I think that's going to come crashing down on them soon, and they'll start paying dearly for that one. But beyond that, hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion, because, you know, it was my Morse code message. Damn it, it was my opinion, but I'm just playing around with it. Anyways, for that, Matthew, what kind of questions do we have? What kind of questions?
All right, so jumping into our first live chat question, the last segment. This one goes to John Cumbest, who says, can an F-16 fighter jet take out an IRBM missile, and if so, using what?
Not really. The F-16s are more so specialized. Really, all aircraft are more so specialized for air-to-air combat and not interceptions of IRBMs or ICBMs. They could intercept a short-range ballistic missile. They could intercept a ballistic missile of a shorter-range category like an SRBM, but the chances of them being able to do that is highly unlikely. There's only been one exoatmospheric interception ever conducted in history, and that was conducted by an F-15 that went on a specialized mission to be able to shoot down an American satellite that was defunct and was going to be going into a decaying orbit to be burned up in the atmosphere. So we shot down our own satellite to prove to everyone around the world that we could do something like that to their own satellites, meaning that no one's satellites were safe. So the answer to that is largely no. They would absolutely not have an ability with an F-16 or any other kind of aircraft like that to be able to conduct an interception of that degree. But still, a very interesting question. And so with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so this one goes to AF Kaplan, a similar question about the ICBM potential launch from Russia. So AF says, is there anything that Ukraine can do to prevent the ICBM from being launched from Yekaterinburg? And I think AF is suggesting some type of covert, like Call of Duty mission to go in there and sabotage it before it takes off. I don't think they could get away with sabotaging it if that's what you're referring to, because I would assume that Yekaterinburg, being a very, very heavily guarded site and one of Russia's top sites when it comes to ICBM and IRBM test launches and research, that place is going to be impenetrable. So I don't think there's much they can do. But Enforcer, is there anything in your playbook they could use to take it down?
Sadly, it would be out of range of most Ukrainian drones. Yekaterinburg is 1,100 miles away, and the longest confirmed Ukrainian strike that we've ever seen was near to the area of Votkinsk, or really Izhevsk, which was about 840 miles away. So it's right now out of the range of a Ukrainian drone attack, and I also feel like there's really no way to get to it on the ground and to be able to try and stop it that way. So I don't really think there's a way the Ukrainians can stop the launch, because if they could, they mostly would have stopped the launch of the Rubesh as well, which they didn't. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. Great question, though, because it's close to almost being in range, but still just slightly out of range by a couple of 100 miles. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Jacob Dunaway, who says, how are the Russian people not revolting by now? Is their propaganda that absurd that they're being kept down by it, or are they simply just being turning a blind eye to the whole situation?
The Russians have a really tight grip on the public, so really any kind of outbursts are usually met with violent reprisals immediately. The leaders of those protests are found and then arrested. They're made an example of, so that way a lot of people wouldn't want to take their place as the leader of any kind of a public opposition. So a lot of people generally live in fear in Russia, which is generally how it's always been. It was like that during the Russian Empire, like that during the Soviet Union. It's like that today in the modern-day Russian Federation. Civil unrest actually leading to a governmental change is very rare and usually completely impossible in Russia. So that's why they're not openly revolting and rebelling. And honestly, we were very ambitious in our original ideas and thoughts on the channel that they ever would openly revolt or rebel during the first opening years of the war, because I don't think that ever will really happen. Now, the military might use them as a vehicle to say that the Russian public was starting to become wildly unhappy, so we took Putin out, or we removed him from power because of the public, but the public would never be spearheading that on their own. Unlike other revolutions, like the French Revolution, where the public actually spearheaded that for the large part, with some minor assistance from the military, but largely did it on their own. As well as any other kind of a situation, for example, in Britain, but even in Britain more so during the English Civil War, that was more so a movement by the House of Lords, well, not really the House of Lords, the House of Commons, to pretty much revolt against the crown, meaning that it was really more of an intra-governmental thing than the people rising up and quite literally destroying the government. However, there is one from the Czech Republic where that did happen, which was the Hussite Wars, or really the rise of the Hussites in general, which were just bands of people who banded together and pretty much overthrew the Czech crown, or King Sigismund, and then also moved on to fight the Catholic Church directly and ended up winning both times. So, you know, those are a few examples, but in Russia, I actually cannot think of a single example where that succeeded. And I know someone's about to be like, the Bolshevik Revolution. Not really so, because there was a decent amount of the army that was actually involved in that, which is quite obvious from the 1905 Winter Revolution all the way up until the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, which was also supported heavily by the military as well. So in Russia, really the only way to go is an army revolt or some sort of an internal coup. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next question goes to Matthew W., who says, what are the odds that the Russians, quote-unquote, forget to remove or accidentally leave a nuke attached to one of the reentry vehicles, and that they aren't really known for coherent actions thus far?
The chances of that are largely slim to none. There is no such thing as quote-unquote forgetting, and if one did hit Ukraine and blew up, everyone would know the Russians didn't really forget. You don't forget things like that. And operating with nuclear weaponry is a very, very closely observed kind of a science, and it's not really something where someone can just be incompetent and forget a nuclear weapon's on board, because there will mostly be triple and double checking to make sure that there isn't. Because if they do nuke Ukraine, that might create massive unintended international consequences or reprisals because of what they did to the state of Ukraine. So there isn't really going to be the chance that there is just an accidental nuclear warhead on board, because they're going to accidentally, quote unquote, leave one on board. They might as well leave all four of them on board. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion. But I have the feeling that the chances of that happening will be slim to none or very low. Moving on from that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so this one goes to Canada is Sovereign, who said, who or what is the first to detect an ICBM launched by Russia, and how soon does it go public? And to detect it, first of all, like I mentioned earlier and explained earlier, they will call us first beforehand if they're being responsible. They will call, and they typically always do that. So we'll get the call. That'll be the first indication. And then we will pick it up on our satellites. We have a satellite array, I believe.
Oh, your mic just cut out.
Space Force. It detects heat signatures from the ground, and we'll see this missile being launched, and we'll know within seconds because it's monitored from Greenland at Patufic, and we will know it's been launched. So we'll get confirmation at that point, but we'll know beforehand. So when it goes public, it's pretty much instantly. Actually, it pretty much goes public within like 5 or 10 minutes these days on different channels like Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and places like that. So we'll know pretty quick. And also Ukraine will announce it as well because there will be red alerts going off all over Ukraine. But Enforcer, what say you?
Also, Matthew, sadly, your mic cut out for about a good 10 seconds there. And it was right when you were saying, I think it's the firm satellite system is what you were trying to say. It cut out right over that. But Matthew is correct. We do have a system of satellites that can pick up those kinds of launches, which gives us about 30 minutes warning time. At least that's 30 minutes warning time if they're launched from Russia towards the United States. A launch from Yekaterinburg towards Ukraine is going to have a much smaller window of maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but we'll still know of it when it's being launched. But they still will call ahead because there's a lot that goes on with nuclear weaponry. For example, if we see one launched and we didn't get a call, we're going to assume that it was being launched towards us, or launched towards one of our allies, or launched towards one of our bases overseas. So then we're going to most likely run that up the chain immediately and go, Mr. President, they've launched a nuke at us. What do we do? And then they'll, end up conducting a little reprisal there. But with that, I hope that does address that well, at least the best I can in my opinion. And Matthew said in the chat, did I cut out? Yes, you did. Would you like to hear?
Yeah, sure.
Let me get this up. And go, Mr. President, they've launched a nuke. So let's see here.
And we'll see this missile be
No such thing as quote unquote forgetting, and if one did hit Ukraine and blew up, everyone would know the Russians didn't really forget. You don't forget things like that. And operating with nuclear weaponry is a very closely observed kind of a science, and it's not really something where someone can just be incompetent and forget a nuclear weapon's on board, because there will mostly be triple and double checking to make sure that there isn't. Because if they do nuke Ukraine, can't really that might rewind create accurately, massive unintended sadly. international consequences or reprisals because of what they did to the state of Ukraine. So there isn't really going to be the chance that there is just an accidental nuclear warhead on board, because they're going to accidentally, quote unquote, leave one on board. They might as well leave all 4 of them on board. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion. But I have the feeling that the chances of that happening will be slim to none or very low. Moving on from that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so this one goes to Canada is Sovereign, who said, who or what is the first to detect an ICBM launched by Russia, and how soon does it go public? And to detect it, first of all, like I mentioned earlier and explained earlier, they will call us first beforehand if they're being responsible. They will call, and they typically always do that. So we'll get the call. That'll be the first indication. And then we will pick it up on our satellites. We have a satellite array, I believe.
Oh, your mic just cut out.
Space Force. It detects heat signatures from the ground. And
yeah, but that was cut out.
Oh, wow. So it was only just like a couple of seconds. But yeah, that's obnoxious when that happens.
Yeah, it was literally right when you said the system and what it was. And I was like, damn.
They don't want it leaking out. It's the deep state. They're coming in and silencing me.
They're coming out of the deep state. But anyways, that I had to make sure to get that from Matthew, because sometimes he doesn't know if his audio is cutting out or not. I just wanted to show that so that way I wasn't, sounding like I was crazy or anything. There's receipts. So with that, we are on to the next one.
So our next one goes to Ed, who said, in each of your opinion, is Russia technically a democracy after the fall of the Soviet Union?
No.
And no, like Russia is not a democracy, by the way. Russia, I believe, if I have this accurate and I remember properly, Russia is considered a federal semi-presidential republic, if I have that accurate. But of course, we all know here on this channel, because we've been following Russia for a long time, it's essentially, in reality, it's an authoritarian regime being masqueraded as a republic. It's not a republic whatsoever, because for it to be a democracy, they have to have free and fair elections. They don't have that because it basically is just Putin 24/7. So obviously not free and fair whatsoever. And also they meddle like hell in everybody else's elections, and they definitely control their own without a doubt. Also, no separation of powers whatsoever. Putin is the sole leader, and he's the one who makes the calls. And the Russian legislature will do nothing without Putin's approval. There's no separation. No transparency and accountability. That's not there either. And there's no political participation. Nobody's allowed to speak out or disagree with Putin, or they get killed or silenced. So no, it's not a republic or a democracy at all, even though they try to masquerade it and make it look like that. It's just all for theatrics. And we've known that for a very long time. But I would say since the Soviet Union, it's basically never really changed. And it went from communism to authoritarianism, just basically. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd pretty much have to agree with everything Matthew said. In my opinion, well, it's not really my opinion. It's really more of a fact. Russia is not an actual functioning, operating democracy. It's only a democracy in name. A lot like how the Soviet Union was also a democratically elected government system in name only, and was more so run by the Presidium more so than anyone else. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Exotic Parallel, who said, did Putin not go to the Istanbul peace talks for fear of his capture by one country or another?
No. Whenever a country, whenever a leader of a country travels abroad by invitation, there's an expectation that there's not going to be any surprise, it's the Interpol, we're here to arrest you, kind of thing that happens on the ground. Because that would be generally a violation of the diplomatic immunity that one would be provided by invitation to a foreign country. So he didn't show up because he was just pissing on the Ukrainian delegation and largely pissing on the U.S.'s wishes to actually see a resolution of the conflict. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And also, if that was the case, and that was really the reason, and he was taking the talk sincerely, he was just scared of getting arrested, why didn't he send Lavrov then? Because Lavrov actually has the position in the government to actually negotiate on Russia's behalf. Instead, he sent nothing but a bunch of assistants and paper pushers to go talk, and they weren't even the heads of their departments. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, let's see, Cody Fritz said in the live chat, Russia is more of a kleptocracy. And if you don't know what a kleptocracy is, that basically means ruled by thieves, where basically the corruption is so rampant in the government, it uses its power at every single level to enrich the politicians and the officials in charge, and the citizens basically get shafted every day. So that's what a kleptocracy is. That happens in Russia, obviously. There are obviously elements of a kleptocracy there, but as a governance system, it's authoritarian because it's only allowed to be corrupt because Putin allows it to be that way. He used cronyism as a way to reward loyalty to his regime, and that's how he keeps people basically under his thumb, is financially. So there are elements of that, but that's not the primary system, at least in my opinion. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say that I actually forgot the question over here. I was sitting here looking at the chat.
He was saying that Russia is more of a kleptocracy, meaning ruled by thieves, and I was saying it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, it's not really like run by like a mob syndicate. It's really more so. It's literally exactly the same kind of corruption that existed in the Soviet Union. You know, the people closer in towards the center of the party, like the people who are close to Stalin or Brezhnev or Lenin, they get a lot of extra benefits that no one else gets. So it's pretty much just it's allowed corruption, kind of like how back in the day in kind of the modern era Japan, and that's around the 1600s. And the 1500s, they actually allowed the let's see, what are the gangs called over there, man?
You're talking about the Yakuza.
The Yakuza was actually allowed to function and exist through a guild of thieves. It's kind of like the same thing. It was thievery and crookery that's allowed by the government. Pretty much, you know, they recognize that it exists and they let it exist for a specific reason. But it was really interesting how it operated in Japan. There was actually there was a legitimate guild of thieves. I don't really know how that worked or why that was the case, but that was actually a recognized thing in Japan. And if you weren't a part of that guild, you couldn't go around thieving. And I was like, aren't you not supposed to be allowed to be thieving anyways? Like, I don't really get it. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Wild Alaska, who said, hypothetically, if the United States changed doctrine and launched a decapitation nuke first strike against Russia, would it increase the survival rate in the United States significantly?
Not necessarily, because even with Russia's more outdated detection systems, they still would be able to have a 15-minute response time, meaning that they'd still launch off all of their nuclear weapons back at us, and we would end up getting destroyed all the same. We can only intercept so many of the incoming ICBMs before we run out of interceptors, meaning that a lot of those would end up hitting their targets, and a lot of people would end up dead in America. So there really is no way to conduct a preemptive first strike without getting nuked exactly in return. Hence the mutually assured destruction doctrine that we work off of over here, because whether we're operating offensively or defensively, we're largely going to end up seeing a mass casualty event ranging in tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of casualties over the first 12 months after the nuclear exchange ended. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question goes to Old Warrior. And Old Warrior says,
Hey.
Western-leaning China critics are saying that the video of the missile kills that Pakistan released was from a video game called Arma 3. And who better to ask than the veteran gamers? And do you know the game? And yeah, we do know the game. I really don't play Arma 3 a whole bunch, to be honest with you. I played it once or twice. The one thing that let me know right away it was video game footage is the lighting is wrong. Because when you look at these videos and the lighting's all off, there's not shadows, there's not like the appropriate amount of sunlight coming in, and it seems sort of muted. That's the first red flag you're looking at a video game. So they actually did release Arma 3 footage in Pakistan, claiming it was showing something getting shot down, or someone released it. It was Pakistan that released it, of course, but it showed some planes getting shot down, and it was total fake. It was from a video game, and they released it from their government account, which was insane. But Enforcer, what say you?
I couldn't really tell if it was Arma 3 or DCS World, because both of them kind of look a little bit similar in that regard, and both of them are about the same age, so they largely work off of the same gaming engines and graphic styles. But yes,
it was Arma for sure, I can tell you.
Can we find that really quickly to look at it?
Man, it is like thousands of tweets down, man. I've reposted so much since then. It's probably gone off our Twitter page.
Dang it, man, that's terrible, because I wish we could go look at it and show it. But I was looking at it. I remember looking at it, and I was kind of divided between two. It could either be Arma or DCS, because Arma does have aircraft, but it doesn't really have aircraft that are as fleshed out as DCS. And these aircraft look to have some better physics engines working on them. And so I was like, maybe it's DCS, because Arma 3 is more so based around ground combat. DCS is more so focused on the air combat side of things. And to me, it looked like the Georgia map or the Caucasus Mountain Range map of DCS World with, I think, an Su-27 and a JF-17 on it, which would exactly line up with the aircraft that you can get as DLCs for DCS World, because they have a JF-17 on the DCS World Steam page that you can get as a DLC, along with an Su-27 and a whole bunch of other aircraft. So to me, it looks like DCS World, but let me go pull that up. Let me see Pakistan Arma 3 footage. Let me see if I can just pull this up and show this. A video game clip shared showing them shooting down an aircraft. So everyone's saying it is Arma 3. But the thing is that I just swear it has like this DCS World look going on to it. Actually, no. Correction, I am wrong. I'm gonna have to eat my foot on this one. It does actually look like Arma 3, because it looks like there's some sort of a Bradley with a tow launcher on it on the ground, like right off to the left
like
side.
salt and pepper with that?
Yes, I would like salt and pepper with that. It was Arma 3. It looked like DCS to me at a glance, but that's definitely Arma 3. So I hope that answers your question well, Old Warrior, because yes, it was from a video game, and it was just wildly it was a complete farce. But the Pakistani Ministry of Defense actually did publish the footage as real combat footage. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Jam Fan, who said, at what point do we consider Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and Pakistan sharing missile tech a legitimate axis of evil and a threat to the West? Because that seems to be where it's going.
It could be considered a threat at any time. I would say that it should be considered a threat just about right now, but we really can't get involved in things like that. Like, countries do have an ability to trade technology or information with each other however they please, and we just kind of have to deal with whatever that creates as a result. It is a threat, yes, but unless they're taking active belligerent action against us, there really isn't that much we can do. Otherwise, we start getting a little bit too jumpy about everything. I see where you're going with that, though, and I would agree, but that we have to have a little bit of nuance with our responses, because if we make everything into a big deal, then we kind of diminish what is a big deal and what isn't. Kind of like if everything is a little deal, and then it kind of diminishes what is really a big deal and what isn't. We have to kind of strike a good balance, and getting involved with those kinds of things on missile development and technologies may be jumping the gun a little bit. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion. But with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Pixel Lord, who said, do you think the recent resurgence of the instability in the Caucasus is why Russia is resorting to these desperate tactics?
I don't think so. As we've been able to see over the years, exactly what's happening in the Caucasus Mountain regions, it really is the same stuff that's been going on for decades. It's just multiple different groups like the Ingushian Liberation Army and ISIS-K, and then the Chechens who never gave up, and then a couple of other peoples like the people in let's see here. I forgot the other provinces, but there are other rebel groups down there as well. And every once in a while, they just get into an armed gunfight with the FSB, and then they roll in more FSB troops to deal with them, or internal security services, and then they deal with them, and then they go into hiding, and then they pop up again. I don't really think it's propelling the Russians to freak out too much, because the Russians do seem to have these situations under control, and while the situation's unstable down there, it hasn't really gone to the point where it's just absolute insanity, and it's almost anarchy down there. So that's what I would say. That would be my 2 bits. I wouldn't really think that this is propelling the Russians to act like maniacs. I think that's just more so status quo, because that's what it's looked like over 3 years at this point. Really 3.5 years nearly at this point. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Mike Jones. He said, have y'all decided on a new Enforcer HQ 3.0 location yet? And no, we actually have not, Mike. We have not decided on it yet, but I have been doing a ton more research because we had to refine our search parameters a bit here, and I ruled some places out. I ruled out Florida completely. I've ruled out Seattle. That one's not going to work. It's too expensive to live there. Had to rule out the entire state of California because the cost of living there is just astronomically high. And I've ruled out Montana as well because it's just too deserted and there's not enough rentals out there to go take. So I had to rule those out. So the ones I've sort of settled on at this point is Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, if that's how you say it, which is obviously connected right with Spokane. So it's literally, I can live in Idaho and keep my guns and everything like that because Idaho doesn't have an assault weapons ban. I can keep those there and keep those in Idaho. And if I want to visit Spokane, I can, and go into Washington where it looks all nice and there's a big city. So that would be a neat place to go. The second place I'm looking at is Fort Collins, Colorado, which is like 20 or 30 miles above Denver. I have never actually really visited that place and thorough examination of it. I've only been through it like really quickly once. So it looks neat, but I'd have to see it in person. And the third wild card here, which I have not actually mentioned ever before, but I've added it to my list because I found a video showing it and it looked pretty damn nice to me, would be Alexandria, Virginia. Which is outside of Washington, D.C. by about 15 or 20 miles or so. And of course, D.C. being the nation's capital, there's a nice little political opportunity there. Not for politics, but I'm speaking about more of like the intel side of things if we ever wanted to pursue that. So that would be pretty neat. And also, Alexandria is a very cool city, by the way. Like, Enforcer, drop us down the street view, like on King Street. If you can see that, it should be like right down. See that football pitch over there on the left?
Man, I see it right here. That's King Street.
Let's see. Go back real quick. This isn't like the part that I'm really trying to show. Let's see. So see the football pitch?
I see that football pitch right here.
So take it down to the yellow road and drop them down.
Man, take it on down to that yellow road. Man, oh, look at that.
This is nice. Like, this is really nice. Like, I really like this. Like, this is pretty cool right here. The only problem with it is the rent costs you a little bit high. That would have to be something I'd look into a little bit more. But I really like it outside of DC. It's really clean and nice looking, and the metro can take you literally right into DC and things like that. So this might be a cool place, a short commute to the office if we ever had one or something. But yeah, pretty nice place.
Actually, folks, I've been looking at living in Langley. I'm just kidding, by the way. Like, I'm just playing. We aren't affiliated with the CIA. Hell, they probably
I didn't say anything about that, man. I just said the office.
Hell, they all know what you're talking about, man. They know what you're talking about. Hell, boy, you trying to play silly. I'm just playing with you. But beyond that, this is an interesting place. Me personally, I'm looking more towards the northwest at the moment. But we'll have to see. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can fairly well, at least for that matter. And with that, folks, it is time for us to move on to the final question of the night. And so, who's the lucky last person to throw in that lucky last question of the night?
All right, and that question goes to Melinda Grifford Vaughn, who said, any word on the cause of the Mexican Navy ship crashing into the Brooklyn Bridge? And do you know if the sailors on the mast actually tried to get off the mast since it was going backwards?
I don't know a lot about that situation. I did hear about it happening, and I did hear that apparently 2 of those Mexican sailors are now dead. While I just whistled while I said Mexican right there, like that was a little weird. But
Are
beyond
you
that,
whistling while you work?
man, I'm whistling while I work. But beyond that, yes, we did hear that 2 of them did get killed, and I think a couple of dozen of them got injured. But I really don't know what led to that. It just went rapidly in reverse into the Brooklyn Bridge and then slammed into it. So I'd have to be honest with you, I couldn't really tell you what happened there because it really hasn't been in our category of news. We've kind of just, largely ignored that, although it was unfortunate, and then moved on to our main news coverage sources, which are overseas news for the large part. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Also, it's really interesting to see that there actually is a shipbuilders in New York still. That's a little wild, actually. Oh, this is a Brooklyn Naval Yard. Okay, that's why they're here. It's a naval yard. Now that makes more sense. I was like, wow, there's shipbuilders left in New York? And no, there's not. But anyways, with that, folks, I hope that does address that quite well indeed, because it is time for us, folks, to round this thing on out tonight. I got to thank you all so much once again for enjoying the show tonight and watching. At the peak tonight, we had 10.3 thousand people here. And over the course of the stream, 68,000 people have watched in only 2.5 hours. We are entirely appreciative and thankful for all of you all giving your time to this channel to listen to all of that breaking news that happened tonight, and to also listen to a couple of questions being answered here towards the end. I also have to give a huge congratulations to y'all for raising a whopping $3,158 on this fundraiser for Revive Soldiers of Ukraine, which is going to be massively helpful for Revive Soldiers of Ukraine as they continue to help save Ukrainian soldiers' lives where they have been wounded in combat almost to the point of near death. I got to thank you all so much once again for supporting American and Western interests around the globe, and we will see you all if there's enough news tomorrow. And I got to be honest with you folks, we're kind of running into a dry spell here for midday news. So if there is any news, I will be making the video tomorrow. If not, y'all can expect to see us on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of news from around the world. And so that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Least Spring Army, and the Least Spring Army will never die.
And with that, folks, thank you all once again, like the Enforcer said, for joining us all tonight on the Sunday night fundraiser stream and helping us raise almost $3,200 of the $2,500 goal. So very fantastic to see you once again, and thank you all for making that possible. And we will see you all on Tuesday night for the next Night of the War News stream at 10 p.m. Eastern, and maybe midday tomorrow for that short war video. But once again, thank you all for joining us, and of course, Slava Ukraine, Heroam Slava, get some rest, and good night.